Okay. Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started with this JUMP conference. First, I would like to thank everyone for joining us for this second virtual conference of Join Us for Motivating People. This is a we've put together a 3-day interactive conference for the ISA community, one that which we hope is very engaging for you. And so this conference for this year's theme, we've put together around sustainability and STEM. We hope that you've come ready to ask a number of questions, to broaden your network and to, just be engaged over these next couple of days with workshops around sustainability and ways to get motivated about the year that we have ahead around the ISA community events and work ahead of the annual conference. So with that, my name is Keenan Torre. I serve as the ISA United States National Secretary. And we next want to hear from you. So 1 second. So Jill has actually just shared a application into the chat function. So if you could please open that up, and we want you to share where you are tuning in from today. Croatia. Nice. Got a couple of DCs. Malta. Italy. This is nice. Norway. Okay. Great. Okay. And so in using the chat, if you could also, South Africa, nice. And using the chat, if you could share why you decided to join this year's conference. Why did you decide to attend, or why did you decide to register? And you can just type your answers into the chat. Learn more from from Dr. Cook. Nice. All right. Okay. So I want to ask everyone to please make sure that you have edited your name to include your first and last name on Zoom. This will help us as we continue to cycle through the program. Want to see a lot of motivated people because it's a great ISA crew in charge of the organization, and to spend more time with ISA people. Great. Okay. All right. So yeah, everyone, please just remember to update your name on your Zoom. And I also want to remind you that these sessions will be recorded. Several of them will be recorded and shared on Facebook. Okay. And I definitely want to share the ISA team. Again, my name is Keenan Torre, and I serve as the ISA National Secretary.
And I'm Dan Ewart. I'm on the ISA ASBL board, and I've been involved with ISA United States since 1999.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jillian Deo, and I'm the Assistant Program Officer, and I've been involved with ISA since 2019.
And this is my 3rd year with ISA. Okay. And Nancy will be with us a little bit later. But she's new to ISA, so I definitely want to encourage you to definitely be, have a warm greeting for Nancy, and she'll look to connect with you, throughout the conference as well. I will now hand it off to Dan, who will provide an introduction for our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Keenan, and thank you, everyone. I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Christopher Cook. Chris is an alum of a Professional Fellows Program exchange between the United States and China in 2010, which was an exchange of professionals working on water management issues between the two largest water users in the world. Christopher Cook is the Wilma Register Sharp and Mark Boyd Sharp Dean of the Cormier Honors College for Citizen Scholars and Professor of Political Science at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia. Dr. Cook is also the HarperCollins author of The Compassionate Achiever, Fulbright Scholar, and a member of the Phi Beta Kappa. He received his PhD and MA in Political Science from Boston College and his BA in Political Science from Boston University. He was also an International Security Fellow at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. He is the former director of both the Kothwari Honors Program and the Center for Compassion, Creativity, and Innovation at Western Connecticut State University. Dr. Cook was also a counterintelligence agent for the United States Army, director of the Jane Goodall Center for Excellence in Environmental Education. He was a research associate for Cambridge Energy Research Associates and has provided the Associated Press, National Public Radio, The Economist magazine, NBC TV, and other media outlets with analysis on a wide range of topics and issues. His research and publications combine neuroscience with the social sciences to focus on understanding how weaving values such as compassion into our learning, civic, and business communities affect levels of financial, intellectual, and social capital. Chris, thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. As many of you know, the academic year in the United States has already started, and Dr. Cook has just completed his morning lecture and is coming just from class. So thank you for joining us this morning, Chris.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be also a part of this great group of students who are interested in STEM and engineering and on the concept of sustainability. And so I'm going to start sharing my screen. So give me a second to make sure this gets up and going. All right. So first and foremost, I want to say there's only 17 slides, including this. All right. So we're going to get through this. I'm going to get through it relatively quick. And Dan and Jillian and Keenan, if someone has questions and you want to jump in, I'm more than happy to do that. Whatever you would like to do. I literally, as Dan just said, just got out of class. And so it's a conversation. And if you want to make it that, we can do that. We can get through and then answer questions, whatever you would like, Dan.
Okay, and great. Yeah, well, anybody who has questions during the presentation, if you could put them in chat and we will monitor that, but of course you'll have a chance at the end to ask in person.
All right. All right, so I call this compassionating sustainability because I believe compassion is a verb. And believe it or not, it used to be a verb about 125 years ago, and it stopped being used as a verb, and I want to bring it back. And I think sustainability is a verb. And if we put those together, we should have double the action in terms of addressing environmental issues. And as Dan highlighted in my bio, everything from water issues, water scarcity, water pollution on to climate change, which they're all interconnected. And I'm going to combine my recent work on compassion, and it's still ongoing, and overlay that on some key studies and key books. So on sustainability, specifically on sustainable development. So we're going to apply my 4 basic steps for establishing or having compassion come alive in communities, called LUCA, as you can see in the bottom of the screen. And just real quickly, L stands for listen to learn. The U is understand to know what you need to do to help somebody. C is connect to capabilities. Sometimes you don't have the capabilities to help solve, but you know somebody who does. Like I know Dan, so he can help with a lot of different issue areas that I'm interested in. And then A, act to solve. And LUCA in many different cultures is also known for bringer of light. And I think when we have compassion, we have the light of understanding around us. One more thing before we get going, I hope to increase your book list. So each slide will have, especially when we get to LUCA, we'll have an environmental study or an environmental book that I think is an important aspect that takes, for example, Peter Haas's work on epistemic communities. Epistemic communities is the fancy way of saying scientific communities and how the difference they made. And also my doctoral dissertation on water scarcity, I call them transnational issue networks, where scientists, people like you, made a difference on the policy end. And so I'm going to get to that. We'll increase your various, wherever you buy your books. If it's an independent bookseller, yes, we'll send you to that independent bookseller to help you get up and going. All right, so here we go. I always like to start off kind of what the structure is. This one's called SOC. All right, we're going to put a SOC on it here, and this is the structure of the keynote. Basically, we're going to talk about definitions of compassion and sustainable development or sustainability. I'm going to also bring in this guy named Charles Darwin because he had a lot to say about compassion and, of course, the environment and evolution. But as a former debate coach, you could win a debate on what we called topicality. And topicality is a fancy way of saying definition. And if your definition is better than somebody else's, that's a mic drop right there. You actually win the debate. You don't have to go on any further. And I've actually, as a judge of debates, I've actually decided on topicality. So we're going to hit the topicality right out of the gate. So we're all on the same page regarding definition of what compassion is and what sustainable development is. Then we're going to go a little bit into the neuroscience of compassion to show what happens in all of our brains, unless you're a psychopath. And if you're a psychopath, please chat to Dan and he will take care of any issues that have on that. And then we're going to get into some examples of what I mean by compassionating, specifically with Luca. And that's where I'll take in studies from around the world, everything from the Senegal River to the Mediterranean Sea, to show how weaving compassion into our thinking could actually help overcome a lot of issues. And of course, that's based on my latest book, The Compassionate Achiever, which I just found out was translated into Russian. So anyone in Russia, it just recently came out. All right, so sustainable development. This is the key. This is the foundation stone, 1987. Right, sustainable development basically is that you meet today's needs in terms of population, so it doesn't take away the needs and the capabilities of future generations. Sustainability succinctly defined. I know there's a bunch of different definitions out there. We can get into the 3 Ps of it, right? People, planet, and profit, right? As well. And we can have a discussion about that at first, but this is the definition I'm using when it comes to sustainable development. It's the citation of where you can get it from. But I just wanted to make sure that when I'm talking about sustainable development, I'm talking about this. And working on a river in the Northeast, the Housatonic River, there were some environmental organizations that did not want to have us working. I was working with another environmental group, a group that was managing the Housatonic River. They didn't want us to work with any like golf courses or any businesses because they believed that businesses were evil and wouldn't abide by environmental regulations. And so what we did is we've said, no, we're going to have still development. We've got to make it so that the businesses want to protect the environment or even weave it into their business plans. And that's exactly what we did. So remember, it's people, planet, and profit. You can actually do it all. It's a little bit more complex. I'm going to argue there's a difference between complexity and complicated, right? There's too many times we make an issue complicated when it's really, if we take a complex look at it, using complexity science, or in recent National Science Foundation grants, it's called convergence theory. But I teach complexity science as well. And I think if we take a complex science look at it, we can move forward. And I think the definition from the 1980s, 1987 is a good starting point. So the definition of compassion basically has 2 parts for me. Compassion is this 360 degrees holistic understanding of a problem or suffering of another. That's the first part. And then the second part, you have a commitment to act for solving the problem or alleviating the suffering. And there's going to be a difference that we're going to talk about between empathy and compassion. And neuroscience is quite clear on this. And when you look at the picture on the right, that's me off to the left of the young lady in pink. And to the right is a mom of Sandy Hook. Quite a few years ago, we had a devastating school shooting about 15 minutes from where I was located and teaching at the time and living, actually, on Sandy Hook, Connecticut. And that mom wanted to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. Unfortunately, it has. But she wanted to do something in schools. And the US government, when something like that happens, sends psychiatrists and doctors, medical doctors, to that area for about 3 months. And so the medical doctor assigned to her, I just read my piece that I wrote for the Dalai Lama on compassion, and on a flight over to New York City. And she said, and this has made me so happy because the doctor literally said this. She goes, Scarlett is her name. Scarlett asked the doctor, is there somebody or something that does this? And it's called social emotional learning. And I had just written a piece on that. And the doctor goes, yeah, the dude, I still had my dude status. The dude is less than 15 minutes away. And so I got connected with her, and we started in the poorest district in the state of Hawaii. They couldn't afford any textbooks, and their scores shot up the next year by 20 points. And we didn't change anything other than a social emotional learning program that I helped create using neuroscience and social science. And so this group of students, they're fifth graders, got into a circle. And that's why I like this 360 degrees understanding, right? The circle, right? And then formed a heart to say thank you to Scarlett for implementing this program. And that picture gives me goosebumps to this day. So that's why I use it. But those are the two definitions, okay? We have sustainable development. We have compassion. Compassion is two parts. It's a holistic understanding with a commitment to act. So Dan, I don't know if there's anything going on in chat. I can't see anything, but if anybody has a problem with the definition, this is the time to speak up, because you can take down topicality. Take my Jenga piece down and make it happen. So I'm just going to give it a second there and make pretend I have something to drink. All right. Actually, I do have something. It's coffee. So, all right, let's get into, Dan, is there anything there? Okay. All right. So let's start with Charles Darwin. And I love The Descent of Man, which he wrote after really much of his research was done. But he's famous for On the Origin of the Species, right? So when I say Charles Darwin and I say survival of the, normally everyone who I'm talking to, and I can't see anyone, but they all say survival of the fittest. I just want to be clear here. Charles Darwin never said that. He hypothesized something like it on the origin of species. Hypothesis. It's one of his guesses, educated guess, that he was then going to test from after writing On the Origin of Species. Well, he did test it, people. And he found out that it was not right. So a guy named Herbert Spencer, a philosopher, liked that guess, hypothesis, and then put that forth as a Darwin's idea, and that's what evolution is based on. Well, I want my 5th grade biology education back, because we didn't read Darwin. We read interpretations of Darwin that use survival of the fittest. But if you read The Descent of Man, specifically chapters 2, 4, and 5 of The Descent of Man, he says this. This is Charles Darwin. Check this out. He says, the species that will move up the evolutionary ladder the most efficiently and effectively is the species that will have the highest number of its members, this is his word, as sympathetic to each other. Paul Ekman and others from Stanford and Michigan, University of Michigan, Stanford universities, have found that he meant 3 things. Charles Darwin meant 3 things when he used the word sympathy in all of his writing. One was altruism. The second was generosity. Oh my gosh. And guess what the third one was? Freaking compassion, right? So it wasn't just compassion, it was freaking compassion. So altruism, generosity, and compassion. That, my friends, is Charles Darwin. So if anything, it's survival of the kindest, not survival of the fittest, what we think is ruthless and individualistic. It's quite the opposite. You're looking over and after and with everyone else around you. And the reason why I put the little American monkey up there, in The Descent of Man, he uses an example to be explicit in what he means when making kind of like a survival of the kindest argument. He used an example of the zoo he visited, where there was a larger primate in with a small American monkey. And the small American monkey would wait to eat until that larger primate was done. The larger primate was pretty bad dude. And so one day, Charles Darwin was visiting that zoo. He saw the caregiver, a human caregiver, come out and bring the food. And Charles Darwin writes about this in The Descent of Man to put an exclamation on his point. And he says, the little American monkey was in its corner, afraid of that larger primate. The human caregiver turned his back, put the dish down, and as his back was turned to the larger primate stormed him, like rushed him. The little American monkey, who was deathly afraid of that larger primate, saw it and ran and intercepted that larger primate to defend that human being. That is what Charles Darwin used as an example of what he means about evolutionary success. People helping, everyone helping each other. So I want to make sure that's clear, because I was very unclear going through my schooling, because I wish they would have signed Charles Darwin's own works so I could have understood what he really meant. So all my baseball coaches, my military drill sergeants, some of my bosses were absolutely wrong about survival of the fittest. I played semi-pro baseball as well. In the military, the best teams, I don't care if it's in business, I was on the American Stock Exchange, I was in sports, every team that were the best, we all looked after each other, right? We don't leave anyone behind. That's Charles Darwin. So this idea of compassion, I just want to say it's not just Darwin himself, but I would argue one of the most important biologists of our generation, E.O. Wilson, talks about altruistic group selection. Jean-Jacques Rousseau talks about how we're all born with natural compassion, but we unlearn it through society, right? So society, if we can bring compassion back in, we'll go back to our roots that Darwin talked about, but also Jean-Jacques Rousseau talked about. So this is, I wish I could say, yes, I came up out of this, I got to have breakfast, literally, I got to eat breakfast with the Dalai Lama, and maybe it came out of there. No. I want to be clear. This thesis is standing on the shoulder of giants in science. And I think if we just put the pieces of the puzzle together from different areas of science, humanities, philosophy, we could see a clearer picture of the world of how to move forward. All right. So on the neuroscience side, I said I would, give you a quick hit here. And I'm also going to talk about the difference between compassion and empathy, because they're not the same. And I don't care what any other neuroscientist says, that doctor that you're seeing up there, Dr. Tanja Singer from Leipzig, Germany, she's the one who found this first. And there's a bunch of guys who are saying that they were first. They are absolutely wrong. Dr. Tanja Singer is the first neuroscientist to actually find this out. Basically, what I'm going to argue is that compassion builds you up and empathy burns you out. And she shows this in neuroscience working. I have, Guernica Picasso, a 1937 Picasso painting that he did just a few months after Nazis and Italian pilots bombed northern Spain. And you got to see that giant work of art. It does look like suffering and pain. And so for me, that's one of the first images that come into mind. And what Dr. Tanja Singer found is that when we think empathetically, and what's really interesting in her work, I think, is that she put people in her fMRI machines from all different continents, from different gender identifications, you name it, the diversity, she went for it. And this is what's awesome. So when we think empathetically, and she had them thinking empathetically, and I defining it as feeling the same emotion as someone else. So when someone else is down or depressed, you get down and depressed. She found that when we think empathetically as human beings, we use the neural networks of when we're in pain. So we release neurotransmitters like cortisol, which is a stress, right? A stress chemical. But then she had people think compassionately along the definition I gave you. And she found something really interesting. When we think compassionately, we use different neural networks. We use the neural networks of when we're in love. And what she found out is that when we think compassionately, we activate a peptide hormone called oxytocin, not Oxycontin, oxytocin, right? And that oxytocin then activates two neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. And I'll show you that coming up. And that gives us a high reward and a calming effect at the same time. So what's really interesting is that when you're really in love, I'm very fortunate. I got to marry my high school sweetheart. We've been married now for over 33 years. When I think about her, I get jacked up. I get jilled up. I get the whole pail of water, man. It lights me up. When you're in love, it builds you up. And compassion activates that network where empathy does not. And empathy has no action. So kind of just a physical kind of metaphor of the difference between empathy and compassion. An empathetic response, if someone falls down into a hole, the empathetic response is to jump down into the hole with them. So now you're both in the hole. Great, right? Not so great. Compassionate response is that, man, someone's down in the hole. Let me get a rope and or a ladder and let me help them up. You don't have to feel someone's pain to know that they're in pain in order to help them, right? And compassion has that action component to it about how to address the suffering. So that's kind of just a basic difference of kind of understanding the difference, really, if you will, between empathy and compassion. And it drives me crazy to this day that so many people use them as synonyms, and they're not. We know neuroscientifically they are not. So we need to start correcting that and using compassion like Abraham Lincoln did, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau talked about. So that's some of the basic differences. And now to kind of give you the neural and social science of compassion. When you think compassionately, you release oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. That creates happiness and hope, right? And for me, hope is where resilience resides and success is built, right? And in my book, I go with the difference between optimism and hope, because just like there's a difference between empathy and compassion, there's a difference between hope and optimism. Optimism, basically, just as a shorthand, you're like thinking, all right, come on, Lady Luck, help me out here. Where hope has an active step to it. You actually are doing something to make the success happen, right? There are a number of different quotes from different cultures that say it's funny how somebody who's very successful, who's worked hard, has so much luck. You forgot the work hard part, right? How they created their luck. So that's just a quick kind of summary of the neuroscience and social science of compassion. And if you're interested on that right side of the equation, taking some dopamine, serotonin, Paul Zak, he calls himself a neuroeconomist. His book is called The Moral Molecule. He's interested in that. Sean Aker, Oprah Winfrey's kind of guru, talks about how happiness leads to success, but also talking about oxytocin as well. And Dr. Tanya Singer's work with compassion and oxytocin with Paul Zak's work shows you how that kind of all goes together nicely. Now, just as an example, because you guys are students, I actually signed this book in the class I just came out of that Dan talked about. It's one of the books I assigned along with social entrepreneurship. It's called Brain Rules, and it gives you a quick hit on the neuroscience of how to learn better and how to work better. And just as a quick hit, going back to that previous screen where it showed you, right, dopamine here, right? Here, John Medina is a neurobiologist. On page 112 of this book, he shows you that dopamine basically is the post-it note of memory. So if you have compassion going around your classroom, compassion going around your work, you actually are increasing learning. Dopamine starting to flow around, that increases memory. That's just a quick hit for you all in terms of what I'm talking about. Now, if I was an indoctrinator of compassion, I wouldn't give you this next slide, but I'm an educator. And so I'm going to give you two authors who are on either side of me. Compassion Achiever is basically a middle path on empathy. So if you go to Simon Baron-Cohen, not Sacha Baron Cohen, the comedian, Simon Baron-Cohen, 0 Degrees of Empathy, he believes that empathy is the answer to everything. But Paul Bloom from Harvard, look at his title, Against Empathy, right? He actually shows you that empathy has led to nationalism, tribalism, and is a stepping stone to racism in this book, and provides studies and evidence to make that the case. It's really interesting. Basically, he shows you, and on the empathy side, they don't disagree with this, but you're more likely to be empathetic with someone who looks like you and has the same background as you. That's why they call it a stepping stone to racism, right? If empathy is your key. I'm somewhere in the middle. I believe that empathy, I believe more in compassion, right? But empathy can give you some understanding, but you have to treat it like fire. So I'm from New York City, and sometimes it snows there, and you can have fires in your fireplace, and it can warm you up, right? The fire in the fireplace can warm you up. So that's a good part. And I think empathy has its good part like that. It gives you kind of another way to understand someone's suffering, right? But empathy is just like fire in the fireplace. If it gets out of the fireplace and onto your rug, it can burn down your house. And empathy is like that. We know that from Dr. Tanya Singer's work, right? That it can take you down. You release cortisol, a stress hormone, right? And it can just make you go in a cycle. I call empathy a kind of emotional quicksand. Once you're in it and you start moving around more, you go deeper into it. You just got to realize that if you're a highly empathetic person, that's something you have to stay on point with. But if you don't like my argument, there's two really cool scholars who have your back, right? One, Simon Baron-Cohen, and the other is Paul Bloom. So, you can have a debate with me all you want, and you have some great evidence to support you in that. Now, this next slide is just show you that compassion can be taught. You can bring back Jean-Jacques Rousseau of Natural Compassion. These are just some of the articles that you can grab. And Dan, if you want me to send this to you, I'd be more than happy to send the whole presentation to you.
Yeah, that would be great, because then we can share it with the crowd afterwards as well.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I had to put the picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama because that was at my former university where he spent 2 days, and I learned a lot from him. And because it's about a 5-year application process to get him to come to speak. And I learned a lot about compassion getting ready for him. And I think that we have a lot to learn from each other's cultures. And I think we forget that a lot of times. And when Dan asked me to do this talk, I felt honored because of you in the audience from so many different cultures. We get to learn from each other. And I'm looking forward to your questions as well. So let's get to Luca. I am a big question guy. I believe that if you can keep asking questions, rather than thinking you get to an answer, you're going to get a lot further ahead in life and whatever issue that you're dealing with. But here in the United States, we live in a society that listens to reply, and it doesn't really listen to learn from someone. So in classes, for example, as the professor, students, I tell them, you're going to see me do this. That's not because I'm praying to hope that I have my lecture right. That's to keep my mouth shut. It's like this to me. It's to keep myself quiet so that students can fully, say what they need to say without me interrupting them. And so I'll do that. And that is just a set for me to be quiet. And I needed to do that because, the thing I'm going to talk about is what I call tree searching. I help cities and towns become cities and towns of compassion across the United States. I'm part of the Charter for Compassion International. We now do it worldwide. And my first city that I worked on, and it was the first city on the East Coast to become a city of compassion, was Danbury, Connecticut. And I thought everyone was for compassion. So when I went to meet with that mayor, I gave him, all these beautiful reasons of how they connect with people, of why he should make his city a city of compassion. But I could see him do this and go back and just become silent. That told me everything. I'd like to think I'm a musician, but just don't ask my kids if I am a musician. I don't think they'll give a good answer. I play trumpet, trombone, bass guitar, but I'm learning some of them. So sometimes the trombone sounds like a dying cow, I think. But I am trying my best to learn the trombone in a better way. And so when someone sits back and someone's become silent, I remember what Mozart said. Mozart said, the music actually can be found in the rest, in the silence. And you can learn so much by the silence. And I realized that mayor was not interested in compassion for compassion's sake. What I had to learn is what tree, political tree, economic tree he was climbing that I could tie compassion to. And that tree is actually a tree along the Baltic Sea in Estonia that I took. It stood by itself. And that just amazed me, because if you know anything about the science of trees, the network that trees create underground, pretty amazing. And I couldn't believe that just beyond that tree was the Baltic Sea. And it was by itself. And it stunned me. And I felt bad for the tree, actually, that it was no longer part of a network. And how long would that tree be there? And the silence around it when I was there, I was visiting my father's homeland. My dad was born in the country of Estonia. And so that's in the city of Pärnu along the Estonian coast. And I was back there on a Fulbright scholarship teaching. And I just sat there and I realized I have to listen to everyone else's tree, what they're climbing. And I realized I didn't do that with the mayor. The short story is all he cared about was economic development. So I showed, using the Financial Times and other periodicals, that where compassion was placed in as part of school system or part of policy implementation, this is what got him. Real estate prices increased. Why? Well, remember that poor district school in Hawaii where the scores went up. In the United States, if scores go up in a town, the real estate prices go up in the town. That's all of a sudden, he leaned in. So I combined economics with the value of compassion. And Jonathan Rose, that book that you see, The Well-Tempered City, if you're interested in the environment and cities and urban landscape, I highly recommend this book. I think it came out around 2016. Well, just like I talked about Mozart, this dude loves Bach. And he was talking about how Bach, right, has, if I can find it, I think it's page 12. He talks about how Bach weaves different sounds together, right? Bach's music weaves together depth and delight in an endlessly unfolding tapestry infused with wisdom and compassion. And in the book, he shows you how Well-Tempered City, a city that's sustainable, weaves economics, weaves communities, weaves biology together as one, as kind of beautiful music that Mozart and Bach creates. And that's complexity science, people, but using music as a way forward. So if you're going to listen for the silence sometimes, because someone else is listening to some other type of political and economic music that you might not even consider. And I made that mistake once. I'll never make it again. And Jonathan Rose, I argue in this book, makes a beautiful statement about how we each can do that, but specifically regard to cities. And as you can see, he talks about compassion and wisdom and biology and economics. So listen to learn. All right. Dan, I don't know if this is possible, but if you can unmute everyone and they could just all yell out how many rows they see.
You
in
unmute
columns. Okay.
Oh, I don't know that we can. I just asked Jill. She's the mistress of the mute.
Jill,
There we
is
go.
it possible?
Okay. Yes. Did.
All right. So everybody unmuted. I just want you to yell out the number that you see that's going to pop up on the top part of the screen. How many rows and columns you see? All right. 1, 2, 3. Dan, you're part of it.
4.
4.
3 and 4.
3 and 4.
All right. Thank you, Jill. So the idea is when you are seeking to understand, to know what you need to do to help someone, you got to see how they see the world. One of the things that you learn about in neuroscience, and John Medina in Brain Rules, the book I posted before, shows us that none of us see with our eyes. We see with our brains. And if you have cortisol going through, you actually have a narrower vision of the world, right? If things that are going negative in your life, you actually are not releasing dopamine and serotonin, which give you a crystal more clear understanding. But if you're going to approach somebody and try to help them with a problem, and you see 4 columns, but they see 3, and you come at it from your 4 perspective, you have the potential of making more of a problem than helping. So you really have to understand how someone else sees the problem, not how you see the problem. And as you can see, you got my little library stamp down here. This is a book from MIT Press that I love. It's an edited volume called Global Accord. And in this volume, it gets to the idea of sovereignty and the issue of how sovereignty is seen both internally and externally. Sovereignty basically states that a country can do whatever it wants within inside its borders and no other country can tell it what to do. That's the internal side of sovereignty. External is that a state can also interact with any other state the way it wants, because there is no higher authority in international affairs. The United Nations sometimes thinks it is, but the United Nations, for example, cannot make the United States, cannot make China do certain things. It can put embargoes on, but it can't push them to do something. So you have this internal sovereignty and external sovereignty. And what's really interesting, especially when it comes to international freshwater issues, is that different states see water either as a national security issue or as a complete river basin issue. So it's how they see it. Is it internal sovereignty or external sovereignty? And how you approach them matters, because Haas and Sundgren in this book show you that states are willing to give up power more so than not. This is interesting. When they think it's internal sovereignty. They don't want other states telling them what to do in the international system. So when you're looking at it from an environmentalist, from a STEM perspective, we all know that a river basin is a holistic system and should be considered as whole. But sometimes policymakers, their perspective on this, on how they see water, can actually create problems in trying to come up with solutions to an issue. And so for me, the Senegal River was a big example of how to actually get countries moving. It's a model for the world to follow along the Senegal River, because Mauritania and Senegal were actually fighting over ethnic issues, and water brought them together and resolved peace. And the United Nations was a big help in that. So basically, understanding to know what you need to do in order to solve a problem, you need to take time to understand how someone else sees the problem, not how you see it. And this gets me to the lifeguard lesson of compassion, connected capabilities. And I'm going to get into that with epistemic communities in the United Nations a little bit deeper with Peter Haas's work. But let me talk about a lifeguard. I was a former lifeguard. Other than being a professor, that was my second favorite job. Counterintelligence was my third favorite job, because in counterintelligence, you know, I got to see some really amazing people do amazing things that no one knows that they did them. They're superheroes, right? Ralph Waldo Emerson says that character is what you do when you don't think anyone is looking. Well, also as a counterintelligence agent, I got to see unfortunately, some of the worst of people. And so that's why it's not my favorite job. My favorite job is to see light bulbs go on in classrooms, or students to challenge me about what I'm saying. And lifeguard was my other favorite, because I got to save people. But I had to learn this. I thought as a lifeguard, you swim out to somebody and you get them, you bring them in, and you're like, yeah, give me some chocolate milk. I just did the right thing. Well, when you go through lifeguard training, you know that's not the case. So I had a double drowning, and I have a scar on my right hand because one young lady grabbed onto me so hard that she broke my skin with her nails and went down all the way to my bone, because when someone's drowning, they get super strong. So what I had to do is take her underwater, and you're trained to do this as a lifeguard. So the lesson here is like, you're taking a drowning person and getting them underwater. Why are you getting underwater when they grab onto you? Because it's the last place a drowning person wants to go is underwater. So they released me. I dove a little bit deeper, came up around her, and then was able to put her into a hold while my other partner came out and saved the other person, and we were able to take them in together. The lesson here is sometimes the connected capabilities is not so straightforward. Sometimes you have to go down and around. And this is where Peter Haas's work on epistemic communities, and I would argue also Margaret Keck and Catherine Sekink's work on transnational advocacy networks show you that people like you all, scientists, can go in and under and around policymakers and create groups. And this is what they did along the Senegal River. They created groups from the different countries of hydrologists to move their policy decision makers forward using science. And the reason it worked so well, and it worked in the Mediterranean Sea where Peter Haas was working, is that Peter Haas showed that countries along the Mediterranean Sea, when they had their own scientists trained, their indigenous scientists, the policymakers are more likely to listen people, here comes empathy again, that were from their own background. If they were from the United Nations and weren't from their country, they were suspicious of what those scientists were saying. But as soon as you can actually incorporate more of the indigenous people from the different countries of whatever environmental issue you're solving, they have an easier time convincing their own policymakers to move forward on, for example, a river basin or on the cleanup of the Mediterranean Sea. And it was through scientific communities that they actually were able to change policy, not coming from the United Nations telling that one policymaker in one country that they needed to change. That actually backfired. So it's not going directly at them like lifeguarding. It's going down, around to where the knowledge, and I would argue the wisdom is, and that's in STEM area and the sciences. So you can, as Edith Wharton says there, you can spread light, you can spread compassion in many different ways. It's how creative you want to be. Finally, act to solve. The Final Countdown is not just only a great 1980 song, and you can Google that later. It's The Final Countdown. I know Dan probably knows that. I don't know about anybody else. But I'm going to use this example I use in the book. How you act can lead to compassion or not, right? You can follow listen to learn, you can follow understand to know, and you can connect to capabilities and come up with a solution that will still screw everything up. And so there are two countries that put on, I'm not going to say what they are, but they put on timers at stoplights. One country, they wanted to reduce traffic accidents. So one country put it on, the timer that is, on green lights. The other country put the timer on red lights. Now, it's the same, idea, same solution, but how they did it differed. One country, traffic accidents actually went up with the timer. The other country, traffic accidents went down. So the traffic incidents that went up was on the green lights. Because when people, I don't care what ethnicity you are, from what country or what part of the world, when someone sees that you have 3, 2, 1 second, and you still have a green light, what do most people do? They floor it because they think they can get through that green light. But when it's on the red light, people are more patient. They're like, oh, I only have 3 seconds before the light changes. And accidents went down. Well, a relatively new book, it just came out this past year, Under a White Sky, talks about how solutions that we think worked to solve environmental issues can sometimes create more of a problem, right? And so she, for example, let's pick on the United States, the controlling of the Mississippi River was supposed to help New Orleans. And so they have controls and levees, and they're taking water out of the soil. Well, what's happening is New Orleans is in parts of Louisiana and New Orleans are sinking a half a foot a year. she's like, the solutions they came up with are actually creating more problems that than we think. And we need to kind of take that long view of. And then she also of a problem, of an issue. And then she also uses the case from Australia of cane toads. It was to help remove insects. Well, now they have a massive cane toad problem, right? It was supposed to help one side, but it's created more problems on the other side. So how you act to solve makes a big difference. And this is part of compassion. It's about a holistic understanding, right? With a commitment to act, but you have to get as many pieces as you possibly can together, right? To get that holistic understanding, that 360-degree understanding. And don't shoot somebody down if they're saying, hey, this could lead to, your X solution could lead to Y problem. Check it out. That's actually how I found out about Charles Darwin. My critics, when I was first doing public talks on compassion, were always throwing Darwin at me. And I realized I never read all of Darwin. I'm not going to lie. When I read The Descent of Man, I drank a ton of chocolate milk and I danced to the final countdown. And I was so psyched because I listened to my critics and they gave me a better solution and a better way of connecting my thesis than I ever would have come up with on my own. I'm going to end with a picture of a rainbow. This is actually a picture of neurons in the hippocampus. I think it's beautiful art, right? And then Donald Hebbs wrote, neurons that fire together, wire together. That's how we learn. Well, you all, STEM students from around the world, you create these rainbows every day by connecting the dots. You can turn our world into a much better form of art than what we're experiencing right now. We need not just your scientific brains, but the art that it creates, because we need a lot of help right now. You are our future scientists, and I would argue by looking at that picture, you're also our future artists. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that inspiration. Does anybody have some questions for Chris? Feel free to unmute yourself. Somebody. I guess one of my questions is, Chris, especially since you work with students, we are taught as part of society, it seems as though we are taught.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, not necessarily to be compassionate, but to be strong, maybe, which is sometimes viewed as the opposite of compassionate. But how does someone, a young person who's starting their career, bring that perspective, use that part of their brain and that side of the neuroscience? How do they get that messaging out to their employers, to their mates?
Well, first off, there's a lot of science out there on organizational behavior that shows that compassion leads to much more successful organizations. And so if you go to, I'll drop another name, another author for you, Adam Grant at UPenn at the Wharton School of Business. He wrote, I think, one of the best books about this called Give and Take. And he inspired me to write my book along with the Dalai Lama. And I think that book will show you how successful organizations, and then in baseball, we call them glue guys, and softball glue gals. They may not have the best stats, but they make a team better. And they're always on the winning teams. It happens in NBA, it happens in NFL, and it happens in soccer and different leagues. You don't necessarily have to have the very highest talented. You just need to have a team that works together. And Pele talked about this, one of the, I would argue, the greatest football player, soccer player of all time. Someone asked him, how did you know to pass the ball, to that open zone where it wasn't, and he was the first one to say, I know my teammates and I know where they're going to be. And he listened to them. He learned from them, and he's the greatest, I would think, of all time. But I would even use history and nature, Dan. So after World War II, Stalin was asked by Churchill, aren't you afraid of the Pope and what he was doing in Poland. And Stalin laughed and said, how many divisions, how many military divisions does the Pope have? Right. And so you have Stalin, who was a brutal dictator. And, just in Estonia in one night, he killed 10,000 people in one night. So he was all about brute force. Well, one question for you, Dan. Where's the Pope's Catholic Church and where's the Soviet Union? That's right. Soviet Union is in the dustbin of history, and the Catholic Church is still around. And on nature, what can cut through rock, Dan? It's some of the softest element, water.
Yeah, water.
Right? So I was told by drill sergeants, or I played football, American football, and my coach would yell at me after I hit somebody on the opposing team and help them up. Cook, why are you always helping them? My drill sergeant, Cook, why are you always smiling? Well, you know what? The people around me were awesome people, and I'm going to help them. They helped me become a better person. So I'm going to help them. Right. And I think if we have more of that perspective, do you think the world would be in a better position? I actually think so. But it's also around us. And go in business. We had this company called Enron. Right. And it was used as a model of how companies were supposed to go. It's gone because it was selfish. And we can get into a whole other story about that, about how they drove electricity into ground to drive profits up. Well, they were caught and they're gone. But then you have companies like Patagonia, who gives back to the communities that they're in. They were founded before Enron, Patagonia, that is, 1973 to be exact. And they're still going strong, and Enron's gone. Enron was supposed to be the big push for it, but then you have gentle Patagonia, right? And if you wear out their clothes, you can send it back and they'll replace them for free. And they give back to the community. Enron never gave back to, all that Enron gave was headaches. And Patagonia gives back to the communities that they're in. So Dan, it's all around us. We just literally have to see with our brains, not see with our ears that people tell us that this is the way forward. Oh, and also, Dan, I don't know. I know you're in the DC area, and it's a lot like New York. And so is it really easy for people to get angry when they're in their cars? Oh, heck yeah, it is. Does it take more strength?
Me, for instance.
Does it take more strength to be compassionate? Oh, heck yeah. Right? So it's right in front of us. We just have to see it.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm afraid we're going to have to come to our the end as we have to move on to our next session.
Okay.
But if you can share your presentation, and we will get all the books that you mentioned and able to the participants. But I think your idea of the survival of the kindest is something that's great to leave with, because that's just something, it sounds so simple, but it sounds so true. And if we are inspired to go back and read some of the things that you read to help you form your decisions, that is something we can start with. So thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Bye.
Bye-bye. So we're going to have a 5-minute break before the next session. And the next session will be a panel discussion on stemming the tide of climate change. And so, but we have a 5-minute break for you. Thank you. And if there's any questions, please put them in the chat.
Hello, and we are back for our first panel of Jump 2021. The title of this panel is Stemming the Tide of Climate Change, a Circular Economy Approach. Now, the circular economy may be a new term, but it's actually built out of concepts and ideas like biomimicry, regenerative design, and the blue economy, which first came into discussion in the 1970s. So what is the circular economy? Well, to start with, economic development has historically been categorized as a linear model with take, make, waste. The definition I'm about to share comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a charitable organization founded for the sole purpose of promoting and reaching the circular economy. And they state that the circular economy is a systemic approach to economic development designed to benefit businesses, society, and the environment. In contrast to take, make, waste linear model, a circular economy is regenerative by design and aims to gradually decouple growth from consumption of finite resources. So in 2015, the global demand for resources was 1.5 what the world could produce. By 2030, we will need 50% more food, water, 30% more water, 45% more energy to meet the growing demands with resources dwindling. So with that, we definitely want to turn it over to our guest panelists, and I want to thank them for taking time out of the midpoint of their day in their early afternoon. In the case of Michael, to join us and share their rich experience on this topic. So as we get started, I will let our panelists introduce themselves, and we will actually start with Saqib. So Saqib, if you could actually kick us off by sharing with us, introduce yourself, how you got into the fields, and walk us how you got into your current role within the field of sustainability.
Absolutely. Thanks, Keenan. I appreciate being here with all of you. Dan, if you're saying something, you might be muted, but it's good to see you too. But yeah, my name's Saqib Akbani. I'm the current co-founder and CEO of Remora. We are a company that basically makes, for layman's terms, Roombas for the oceans. So devices that autonomously travel around local waterways and utilize machine learning and computer vision to effectively clean and skim for marine debris, all the while using more efficient practices and more efficient algorithms to identify where trash hotspots are and make the process cleaner, greener, everything like that. So I started my pathway in the field of environmental engineering. And very quickly I realized that although my goal was to go into environmental engineering, work at another company, work a 9-to-5, that was the plan. When I graduated, I realized very quickly that the roles that were out there, the work that was being done in very kind of small pockets in small companies around the world. And the jobs that I were getting, the job offers that I was getting were in my current job, for example, in kind of space technology, like I'm working on a NASA project right now, and that's not environmental sustainability. So to kind of keep myself sane, a couple college friends and I and some professors on campus basically came together to work on this, and it's been almost 4.5 years at this point, and we're still trucking around, so feels good.
No, that's amazing. And definitely, I'm sure the entrepreneurial spirit is something that will come up more and more as we progress through the panel conversation. Next, I want to pass it to Michael. So Michael, if you could introduce yourself, kind of walk us through how you got into the field and got into to urban farming.
Well, actually, it was a lot of twists and turns. I actually got into sustainability more from doing graduate work on algae biofuels. And by the time I finished my PhD, the algae hype had completely busted, the bubble had busted, and the world moved on past algae. So I was overly qualified to analyze oil in exactly the position I did not want to be in. So at the time, my girlfriend now wife became quite sick, and that's where my attention started to shift towards nutrition. And through nutrition, incorporating a lot of sustainability to it. This is where we started looking at how food was produced and how to produce better food, and how one could transform current systems to be able to do such things. So at our core, we focus on using all the best practices of organic farming, actually even beyond organic in many regards, to focus on the soil biology. And by improving the soil biology, you can produce better food. And we're trying to bring these best practices as well indoors. So it's kind of a way to produce food locally at the point of source where it's going to be used. It also rolls in with a pandemic, as it would be, for cities to be more going blank on the word, self-reliant, and so this is where we're kind of going right now with it, and trying to develop a lot of these sensors and some of the monitoring technology, so to bridge the gap, so that essentially anyone could be able to do this. We're trying to lower that knowledge barrier and provide a lot of the resources, so eventually others would be able to follow in a very similar path to what we're trying to pave.
And before we move forward from introductions, I definitely want to make note that Michael was actually, you said you worked with the Houston chapter for ISD, is that correct?
Yeah, back in the day, I founded the Houston chapter and was president for a bit. And then, kind of a lot of wonderful old memories popping up but sorry, I'm a little over caffeinated. And it's a little bit late in the day for me. So, I also attended Jump back in the day and in Ghent, Belgium. I think 2000, I forget exactly, 2004, maybe 2005. And was also the regional, what was the name? Regional representative for the Midwest or the South, that block.
No, that's definitely excellent. It's always great to, always have an alum, especially someone who has attended Jump. That's excellent. And next, let's see, want to hear from Stephen King. So Stephen, if you could introduce yourself, how you came into the field, and how you got to the position which you are in today.
Thanks, Keenan. Appreciate it. Glad to see you all here. Dan, good to see you. And so again, I appreciate being welcome to this space to talk about my story and my journey. So I could go back to, I was a little kid growing up in Brooklyn, but I'm not going to do that because that's a very long story. But I will say that I was studying international affairs at the New School, and I was very interested in megacity management, and particularly in how Africa is using its natural resources. And at the time, back in 2003, how they were starting to have conversations with China on its use of natural resources in a way that I thought was extremely detrimental to independent economies. And so from that, I actually did an internship in Hong Kong in the transport department in sustainability, and really saw some of the amazing work that they were doing back in 2003. Came back to the US and started working with the Global Labor Institute at Cornell University's Industrial School of Labor Relations in New York City, and really started to have conversations with labor leaders nationally and globally about what they were calling at the time the low carbon green economy and green jobs. At the time, Van Jones was doing a lot of conversations about green jobs. Barack Obama was coming onto the scene. And the conversations that I was having in New York City, which is a highly diverse city for the most part, the conversations I was having, there were no people of color in the room. So I was the only person of color. And I thought it really odd and strange that we were talking about something that really needs global connections and people in all spaces and areas involved in the conversation. And yet I didn't see it. And at the time, there weren't a lot of sustainability programs in colleges and universities. There were a lot of environmental studies programs, and there were starting to be some transitions into the conversation around sustainability and how the two are extremely related. And so out of that experience, I decided to create a charter school in New Jersey called the Barack Obama Green Charter High School in Plainfield, New Jersey, which was New Jersey's first charter high school focused primarily on environmental sustainability. And so for us, the conversation and the focus was, how do we move Black and brown children into this space of sustainability and move past just the low-hanging fruit of green jobs and talk about innovation and all the other sectors that are involved in sustainability and environmental science. And so that was a pretty heavy lift because those weren't traditional conversations we were having back in 2010. And so it was about not just helping the Department of Education understand what that really means, but also the community that the school was operating in, the teachers, and the parents in particular. And so from that experience, in fact, that's where I met Dan, working on a program together. And so I helped build that out with the school. I was in charge of all the sustainability stuff for the first 3 years, helping the teachers to do project-based learning, which was a tool that we used to really help infuse the science part of sustainability in a easy, digestible fashion. And then led the school for the next 4 years as the school leader. Having left the school, I then was thinking about, how do I do this work on a larger scale? I ended up being a visiting scholar at the Tishman Environment and Design Center back at the new school, working with college professors, and more importantly, having an opportunity to work with students around this issue of how are they prepared and being prepared to really take hold into this new economy, and how they can be a more active participant in, and the type of skills that they needed to develop in order to be really key players. So from that, I then, I left that after a year and was working with an organization called the Environmental Leadership Program, which is an environmental program really set up to support and develop leadership skills of people in the environmental sector. And attached to that was this idea and concept of how are they supporting diversity in this space. At that time, back in 2019, there was a report released actually back in 2014 called the Green 2.0 report, which really talked about the lack of diversity in the environmental sector and how most people of color that were involved in the environmental sector were really at the administrative level. But you didn't see people on the higher levels in terms of having C-level positions or involved in the boardroom. And so from there, becoming a fellow of ELP, they were created this program called the Ray Diversity Fellowship Program. And so I ended up working as a director for that program. And that program is primarily focused on supporting emerging leaders of color in the environmental sector. And we work primarily with nonprofits and government sectors, with a bunch of organizations such as NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Pew Charitable Trust, and a bunch of others on both the West Coast and East Coast. But what I found missing in the work was really how are we also working with the private sector to cause shifts and changes. And so through my own consulting company, Global Sustainable Solutions, which I do a lot of other work with, we developed a fellowship primarily for the private sector to really talk about how are we moving what we call emerging leaders of color, which are anywhere from recent college graduates to those who have probably about less than 4 years experience into these roles, to really support them in terms of what does it mean to be an emerging leader and how do you find your own voice as an emerging leader and get the support you need to be successful in this sector. And so that's my journey.
Excellent. Next, I want to pivot to Michael, and I want to hear about if you could share how does your work fit into the circular economy, And also, if you could share, any challenges that you may have had and within your work and trying to make it as a sustainable model throughout the entire process as possible.
Well, in our case, one of the core aspects that we're trying to address is access to nutritious foods in cities. But the underlying point to why this becomes more pressing is that so much food waste occurs in getting food just from point A to point B, and the actual consumption of that, whether that food is consumed. Most groceries from at the grocery store are thrown out just because they're not purchased in time, or they go off. And in the case of lettuce, oftentimes you're eating lettuce from the previous week's shipment. They're always trying to move older product. So we're trying to address one of the core aspects of food waste is that to produce food on site or near where it would be consumed. And then by also incorporating only organic practices through soil remediation and practices of addressing the biology, we're hoping to eventually start to bring back what we're doing indoors. As we're working in developing the ways to do it indoors, we want to then, once we have it, also bring it back outdoors and start remediating farmland around wherever we are. So essentially, we want to reduce food waste. We want to reduce fertilizer need and demand, reduce the amount of miles and all the fossil fuels that go into transporting all of these foods across the country. I mean, at least in the US, most of the produce comes from California, at least west of the Mississippi. That's a lot of miles things are having to transport. So we're trying to do our own little piece of trying to address a lot of the fundamental foundations of the circular economy. And that's just basically reducing waste. A waste across the board of how the entire system is built. And so trying to decentralize a lot of that production and empower the others to be able to do it themselves, and to empower people who want to improve their own health through improved nutrition. To address some of the challenges, a lot of what we're trying to do and what I think makes us unique is the fact that we're trying to take the best science and the most cutting edge science. So a lot of the work that we follow, and whether it's the lighting frequencies, that's based on NASA's work for growing veggies on the shuttle or in the space station. The work on understanding the genetics and the genomics of the soil microbiology, that's based on cutting edge genetics work from Elaine Ingham and others who are pushing the movement of improving the soil food web. So basically our unique point is the fact that because of my technical background, I'm trying to infuse as much new research, cutting edge research into what we're doing to revamp what typically has been just a kind of a hand-me-down system where farmers were they did what they were told, or what they saw other people doing. And for this reason, this is one of the biggest challenges, is because, well, it's both cutting edge research, but it's also incredibly data intensive. And so, yeah, so it's just getting through all of the data, trying to stay on top of what is relevant and what isn't, trying to just cut out all the noise, which it's already a very, just cutting through all the noise. And so with sensors and with trying to incorporate all of it's just because of the type of technology that we want to infuse. I mean, just the fact that you don't even find that many papers that talk about the soil microbiology on a species level. It's just broad strokes at best. And yeah, it's a rather unexplored area, which is surprising. We know more We know more about space than we know about the ocean bottom, the ocean floors, and we know more about the ocean floors than we know about what's in the soil. That's just kind of putting things in perspective.
Yeah, I
That
mean
is
that's
very interesting.
so interesting because there's no way that I would think that that it would be in that order. I would totally think it would be in the opposite order. Yeah, and you also mentioned trying to cut fertilizer out of the process as well. What's the reasoning behind how does that play within the soil piece and trying to?
So basically, almost all soil, all land has sufficient nutrients in the soil. It's just they're not accessible. I believe the earlier speaker mentioned what's the one thing that can cut rock. Well, actually, microbes have the ability to produce acids that dissolve that rock. And so it's what my point I'm trying to get at with is that it's the biology itself that has the ability to nurse the plants and give them all the nutrition they need. And so if you have the right biology, you don't need, if any fertilizer, you don't need as much. You don't need pesticides if you have the right biology and diversity of plants where you have the right beneficials. I believe that there's one quote from someone in this soil food web movement who mentioned that there's thousands of beneficial microbes and insects for every one disease that farmers encounter. But we're not using the right mix of biology to address this. We're just, treating it a little bit like if the only tool you have is a hammer, you treat everything as a nail. And by applying more fertilizer, by applying more pesticides, you deplete the land even further of its biology. And then at that point, it becomes so barren that you can't grow anything. So we're trying to unweave all of this at the fundamental layer, which is actually just the soil itself.
That's not even to mention the runoff, right, of that pesticides
into
local waterways, into the oceans. The effects
so I mean, a lot of what we talk about in the circular economy is about basically turning your waste back into some form of feed or starting point. But you could just cut out a lot of that if we just revamp how we think about systems and how we need to do things. So this is in our own little way, we're trying to address the circular economy by fundamentally working at the foundation of what do we actually need to be doing.
Excellent. Sakib, if we could hear from you next. Definitely want to hear how Remora fits into this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that Remora is really born out of the symptoms of not utilizing a circular economy model in the first place, right? So I think it's something like 1.4 billion pounds of trash ends up in our shared oceans every year. And the majority of that is ocean plastic, right? And the widespread use of that single-use plastic and frankly, the lack of incentives or consequences not to be developing and producing those single-use plastics by corporations is really the impetus, right, for why we have such a significant problem. And I think a large reason for why we started tackling this issue, and this is a conversation that my co-founders and I had very early in the development of our product, that we didn't want to just be putting a Band-Aid on the solution and just be, frankly, the garbage men of the ocean, that, right? People can keep dumping it, and don't worry, guys, our drones are there. Toss your stuff into the ocean, we'll figure it out. And we realized very quickly that, I mean, as important as cleanup is, as important as remediation is, it's almost as important to be not only raising public awareness, which frankly can get pretty, like it can get pretty shaky in the sense that raising awareness can, be watered down pretty easily, but also frankly, pushing for more government regulation to reduce the need for single-use plastics. Frankly, there are very few cases in which single-use plastics are necessary, and there needs to be a system by which the companies that produce those plastics are also then responsible for the full life cycle, right? The cradle to grave process of that specific piece that they create. And right now, that just doesn't exist. So what we're planning on doing with the plastics that we collect from the oceans is effectively try to give it some value, right? There is still inherent value in these plastics. A good amount of it is degraded, right? But even in the use of, you've probably seen similar things to this, but upcycling companies are taking ocean plastics and turning them into sunglasses and turning them into wearable shoes, right? And that kind of does that has two strong benefits, right? One, obviously, you are creating value from something that was deemed valueless. But the other part of that too is then raising consciousness about the fact that, hey, that wrapper that you just ate for that candy bar that you just threw away in the trash, that is still going to exist for your generation, for your kids' generation, for the next 10 generations. It will outlive probably the rest of us. And I think that cognitive shift is really something that we are trying to push forward first, instead of saying, hey, we can develop this from a tech perspective, and we will. But while that's happening, there also needs to be that cognitive shift that pushes us in a different direction, because what we are doing right now is not sustainable.
No, that's excellent. And I definitely want to get back to a point that both of you have brought up about these cognitive shifts in just a moment. But Stephen, we definitely want to hear from you. I mean, what has your experience been like in working with companies to try to shift them towards more sustainability? And do you have any examples that you should think are similar to the shoe or glasses model that Saqib just referenced, of companies doing it the right way?
Yeah, great question. And so in many ways, you've got to look at it in terms of two sectors, right? The nonprofit space is taking things leaps and bounds, right? They are definitely committed to working in areas of sustainability, whether it's philanthropy or foundations. They are funding projects and programs that support sustainability. The real question is, what kind of movement and how deep is the work going, whether it's in the nonprofit sector or in the private sector? And let's just say the private sector has woken up to the bottom line value that having a sustainable focus brings to the organization. First and foremost, they are looking to make sure that they are not left behind in terms of consumers who are spending dollars to support that mission. Right. And this generation, especially Gen Z, is primarily focused on saying that the values that I have has to be connected to the organizations that I support and the businesses that I support. And so companies are falling over themselves at one point to do what they call greenwashing, right? Everything is eco-friendly, everything is organic, everything is sustainable. Not, right? And so for the professionals on the call, they look at it and say, okay, let's look at the supply chain. Let's look at if you're taking, like, for instance, my phone, and you're saying, we're going to now take this and we're going to make it part of the circular economy. And when you're done, ship it to us and we'll deconstruct it. Well, first of all, how is it being shipped, right? What is the mechanism in which we are transporting these materials? Number two, the materials and ores that are mined for this, how are they being done in a just fashion? And so when you talk about sustainability today, there are two really big areas that companies are now starting to look at. One is they're figuring out how to do things in a more just fashion. And the other thing is that they're trying to figure out how to be inclusive in the work that they're doing, right? And so you've got to look and say, which organizations and companies are focused in on those two things? Because sustainability, every company has someone involved in sustainability. They've got, a vice president of sustainability. And I've talked to a bunch of them, from Estee Lauder to Johnson & Johnson to Fidelity Investments, right? Like, they've got a vice president of sustainability. Okay. And if you all are looking at job boards, you are seeing more and more positions for people who are either working in and around sustainability. In fact, there's this space called in investing called ESG, which is environment, society, and governance. And these organizations are now figuring out what metrics they're using to measure it, to do investments. And it's really wide open for people because they don't have enough people with those skills and experiences to doing that. And so it's not a matter of if organizations are making headway. They are making headway. For me, it's really the question about when we talk about emerging leaders, how much flexibility do they give to these young people coming into these roles and positions to actually lead on projects and to advise them in terms of here are better ways of having authentic connections and more ways of creating a just circular economy. Because in that report that you were talking about, how many times did they talk about justice in that report? I believe is 0, right? And so if you're not talking about how are we doing this in a diverse way, particularly in the US, but globally, when we talk about diversity, it's not just racial diversity, it's also ethnic diversity. There's diversity of people with various learning styles. And I recently had a conversation with someone who was saying, well, how are we bringing in people who have different learning or cognitive abilities into this field of sustainability? And I said, looking around, I haven't seen any programs that are doing that, but they have value that they bring to this work. And so the goal is to say, especially for emerging leaders on this call, say, what is it that I truly value and which organizations are doing that type of work? Sustainability, yes. Environmental science, yes. It's taking place all over the place. But again, it's about who are making those authentic types of connections. And again, in the US, some of the organizations that I've worked with that are doing really great jobs are nonprofit organizations that are already kind of in that space doing the work. But when you look at things globally, there's a company called Aeon that creates a digital ID for items of clothing, so they can track them. They can tell the types of dye materials that were used, percentage of that recycled, or if it's organic, if it's fair trade, if you can swap the materials out. And it really increases awareness of waste, which is a big thing. And for them, the work that they're doing, Microsoft is going to bring in about, I think, 400 million garments online in 2025, right? So that changes the behavior. And when an organization like Google does something like that, it changes landscape, right? Because then other companies are figuring out, how can we keep up with Google, right? And so you look at organizations that are market leaders and the work that they're doing, and you try to support and push them in those directions. But again, you've got to make sure that you're bringing in these emerging leaders to say, here are some of the thoughts and ideas that I have, because they're the ones that are saying, this is the direction that we want to go in. And believe me that they have those ideas, and those ideas are very valuable. And organizations that are following them are seeing great resources and actually great improvements in their bottom line. One of the things that, you know, when Michael's talking about food waste, there's a company, I think it's called, or a software called Wasteless, that helps supermarkets keep track of, keeps tabs on perishable foods through, like, they have an AI pricing, and it offers automatic discounts on foods that reach expiration dates. And so there are a few companies that are figuring this out. A lot of them are startups and that have, you know, received some funding through angel investors that are doing this work. And I say, like, that's a really great place to start. Because one of the things is that you want to gain as much experience and really get a taste of all those different types of segments in circular economy and in sustainability, to say, here are things that I'm really interested in. Because I think for Gen Z, the average is like 5 to 7 different jobs or careers throughout their lifetime, right? So whatever you're engaged in now, you are just really building up those transferable skills to be able to use to wherever your interest eventually takes you.
And Stephen, you brought up some really interesting points about how this generation, current generations, are influencing the way that companies are making decisions and the way they work. Sakib brought up similar points during as he was talking, and so did Michael. And I really kind of want to stick to this point just a bit, and kind of just open the floor to all three of you to kind of talk about, you know, your experiences and how this works, because it's pretty difficult when you're talking about the wrapper, I think that someone brought up, and how it'll be here for multiple generations. You're talking about changing people's human behavior, and this is a pretty difficult process. No matter where you are in the value chain or the chain of production in this process as you guys find yourself. So if you could kind of share out your experiences, I really want to hear more about this, because this is a challenge that we all find ourselves in. How do I motivate people to not only care more, but also maybe change their the way in which change our actions.
I think one thing that Stephen brought up, right, is the fact that, for example, right, Gen Z really does focus, at least externally, right, on the companies in which they're engaging with, and the ethics that they hold. And I think a really critical part there is understanding your audience, right? Every single group of people that you're talking with is going to have a different perspective and a different place, that different direction that they're coming at sustainability with, right? So just one quick anecdote. I was at an investor conference with Remora, and I think it was the president of Blackstone, big financial institution, was giving a talk, right? And I had a chance to talk to him afterwards. But I asked the question during the conference as well, and I said, "Hey, a lot of people are kind of focused on the triple bottom line, which, the idea that you've got people, profits, as well as kind of purpose, right? Those are your three bottom lines. But how does that really fit in, and how do you kind of push towards, getting funding in that direction?" And he gave me one sentence. He said, "Yeah, well, you have to make sure that you're profitable." And that triggered something in me, where I realized, I was like, this is who I'm talking to. This is how this person's brain works. And you need to make sure that your messaging matches that for different people, right? And I think if you can do that for enough different types of people, that's how you try to shift the cognitive perspective.
Definitely.
In our case, we're first addressing the people who are most in need of nutrition. So again, this all stemmed from my wife's health issues. And so we wanted to first address that target market first, of those who either are maybe not totally enthusiastic about the medical care they're getting, or they're not seeing the progress or feeling the progress that they hope to achieve. And, or maybe they just, more specifically, we're trying to empower people to take their own health in their own hands. And so in this regard, what we're really trying to do is first address the people who need it the most. And we're hoping that they are the ones who would be spreading it through word of mouth to others, and hopefully changing hearts and minds through more empathy and sympathy. We're not trying to, most people are not our market, and most people we're not going to even bother trying to market to them, mostly because they're set in their ways. The only way that someone really wants to change is if they convince themselves they want to change. And that's often best done by a loved one, a friend, a colleague, someone where they have that emotional connection to, where they want to hear that message and they want to digest that message. So in our case, it's a very, no pun intended, it's an organic type of messaging. But that's really how we're trying to approach it, because we don't see any practical way that we can do more than that. But we also see it's a very effective one, just to utilize sympathy and empathy as our main marketing strategy. That's really kind of where we're hoping to drive with it.
I would just add that Gen Z is already doing it, right? In this social media climate that we're living in, it's about attention. And the way you get attention is by banding together with like-minded people, right? So we already have the mechanisms where that's taking place. People have been sharing information. Events globally that have taken place have been supported and sometimes prompted through social media. When I was a young kid, I remember physically going out to march to help schools divest from South Africa. You know, that level of physical proximity is no longer necessary, right? It is important and it still needs to be done. However, you can do things through social media. So whatever your interest is, you can also connect with like-minded people and then start to get attention. And there's people wherever and everywhere that are interested in some aspect of the work that you're doing. And so I would say, if you are really focused on gathering those people together and creating a strong social media message, and then backing that up by finding organizations that are doing the work, you increase your platform of attention. And so I would say use every means and outlet possible to really get that attention, because that's really what people are fighting about. Like we get all this noise that's coming in, whether it's through LinkedIn or whatever social media platform we're looking at, TikTok, Instagram, it doesn't matter. Everyone's vying for that attention. And when it's something that sparks your attention, that you're saying, wow, I'm interested in that, you start to pay attention to that. The other thing I would say is that, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of people want to be involved in something that's really cool, right? Really cutting edge, really that's gathering the attention of others. So you will get behavioral change because people want to be involved with the group that's doing something that's unique, right? So if you're an individual that's a market leader, you've got like, I don't know, 20 or 30 people around you that listen to what you're saying, you're starting to say, hey, these are some of the things I'm involved in. This is what I'm interested in. Other people start to say, hey, well, I'm involved and interested in that as well, though they may not have that same level of interest or information that you have. So realize that as an individual, there are people that are looking at you, and there are people that you have influence over. And so if you take that, first of all, respect that, and then be able to introduce information and to say, here's the value that I find in it. And I do think that it is what's really critical is this thing about leading with empathy. And I think in a previous segment earlier today was one of the speakers that was talking about that. And if you haven't heard of a guy named Gary Vee, who's in business, connect with him. He's doing a lot of work with companies around this idea of leaders leading with empathy and how that is so critically important to that next generation of leaders.
Okay, so I have a couple more questions, but I want to, before I get to those, I want to open the floor for any questions from the audience that may be out there. If you have a question, you are free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can type it into the chat and I can read it out as well. Thomas, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, that would be nice, as long as nobody else wants to start. I'm very interested in the topic of sustainability, and I believe ISD should play definitely a leading role also in this area in terms of providing internships in sustainable businesses, sustainable industries like the wind energy, like anything that's related to decarbonization of our transportation and so on. But what I'm very curious to hear your opinion about this, and I mean, you all come from the US, and I think in the US this is a much major topic than it might be in Europe or in any other places in the world. I mean, looking to the most wealthy people on the planet, we have one guy who was just flying to space, investing an enormous amount of money he generated by one of the most unsustainable businesses in the world, shipping stuff around the country that is returned 50% of it a day later or 2 days later. You have another guy who was heavily involved in the IT sector, running data centers. And we all know, like nowadays, we need artificial intelligence, we need our cloud, we need our online platforms. But when I follow the trends and tendencies about cryptocurrencies, about mining, and so on, and I mean, you see what enormous amounts of energy are necessary just to run all this computing power. And then you have another guy who also is going to space, at least a bit more, let's say, successful in terms of that he's also cooperating with NASA and other governmental institutions. But when you see the electric cars, and I don't know how this is assessed in the US, but we in Europe, our trend is very clear. We want to have electric mobility within the next 10 to 15 years, almost all over Europe. But what people tend to forget is where is this electricity coming from? Because it will not be wind power, it will not be solar power only. There will be weather other means. So what's your perspective on this? I'm very curious to hear your ideas about this.
I think that you're absolutely correct. We've for almost 100 years have been totally reliant on a single form of energy, fossil fuels, and made an entire system based on this. The future is going to be a patchwork of different solutions, much in many ways relegated to where it's located. I mean, in Iceland, they grow tomatoes and bananas with lights year-round because they have almost unlimited geothermal. So it'll be very dependent on where it is, on what type of solution would be appropriate. But yeah, your question is both timely and devastatingly difficult to answer. The world's only consuming more electricity with every passing day, with no real need to stop. At least no one wants to stop. That no one wants to be inconvenienced to change their behavior. Will it take a major disaster for that to click for some people? Perhaps, but on the silver lining of it is that there's a lot of new technologies coming down the pipe that would be able to enable at least our current lifestyle, as resource intensive as it is. And part of it would be new technologies in batteries to be able to store that power and to be able to use it when more appropriately needed. So collecting power by day and using it at night. It sounds so simple, but it's going to be a lot of different things. It's going to be new materials that would be either more efficient or being able to capture different forms of energy that we wouldn't be normally using. And yeah, one can only hope that there would be something new that we haven't yet fully realized its potential yet. But to answer your question, it's with the total electrification process, yeah, where is that power coming from? And also, how is that power even stored or generated, for that matter? Where are those the elements, the lithium? Where is it coming from? Where are all the rare earth metals coming from? And how are they even being produced? I mean, if you take a look at a strip mine, you'll see that, yeah, you can get a lot of material out of the ground, but you are destroying everything around it too. So all of these issues all kind of come around, and it's a very difficult question to answer. And I mean, all of us can try to do our part.
I think it's a good point, and I can go on top of this if unless somebody else has another question that needs to be asked. No, we're running pretty short on time, so I'll try to. Sure,
questions, and I mean, like, they're partly answering right now over this conversation. But first of all, I had a question to I'm sorry, Michael, right? Michael, but you also mentioned, so I just graduated with the master's degree in environmental science and also advanced studies in sustainable enterprises. So I did multiple dimensions of sustainability, especially at the corporate level. but the issue I was working on is pro-environmental behavior and how we change it. So since Michael mentioned that he was more working with like lab and research and technology advances, my question was exactly the outreach approach, how you work with multiple stakeholders. You said that you work, as I get it, like one by one.
So right.
Yeah, so my question is, I was specifically with the leadership ability to change, you know, people attitude and specifically behavior, because attitude not always changes behavior. So how, and specifically leadership in the corporate world. So since more companies adopt sustainability approach, how do you see the leadership ability to kind of shift around human attitude and approach we treat, you know, the consumption, just resource efficiency and all that stuff?
Okay, this is a little embarrassing. My wife is calling me on the landline because I muted my phone. So my apologies for that.
Yeah, well, everybody can jump.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I was a little distracted. Your question was how to address the
behavioral change.
Behavioral change. Right now, we're not at a point where we first, well, as our name implies, Urban Farming Bremen, to sell something, we need to grow something. And so we're still in the process of working out the kinks on how to grow efficiently. So we're not yet growing very much, but what we are doing is trying to focus on the target market and the way they would perceive our product and how we can educate them in this process. How to reach others, we haven't figured out a good way for that yet, to be honest. We're trying to find different streams of contact, whether that is reaching people through hospitals or other means of how they're how they're obtaining their health care. Also trying to connect with a like-minded community, much like Stephen was mentioning about banding around like-minded people. We're hoping to also connect with the farm to table movement and other organic entities that are already working in this general space. So I'm not sure I answered your question even vaguely well, but
okay, how do you see the leadership potential, you know, in facilitating this process? Like if you have in a company a few leaders that would really, you know, lead this movement, how would you see this potential? Or any other who's presenting today?
I'm not sure I can answer your question very well. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Still working on it ourselves.
I did want to touch back to something as part of Thomas's question regarding kind of the pathway of electrification and technology, as well as the role of kind of the big corporations, right? When we do have these billionaires funneling money into so many different types of maybe not environmental approaches. Coming from an environmental engineering background, and I worked in some research in solar thermal energy battery research, and that kind of being my whole pathway. I have no doubt that the technological needs that humanity requires to address global climate change will be met. I think in terms of the technology for renewable energy, as well as battery storage, as well as electrification and transportation, there is no doubt in my mind that we will be able to meet the technological challenges that we face. I think the bigger challenge, and I think the bigger perspective, is the idea that currently solar and wind is cheaper in many places than oil and gas. And I think currently we have that technology already present. It's just the reallocation of resources from existing technologies into those burgeoning technologies. And I think that is, it's the boring answer because everybody likes high tech. I love high tech. I work for a high tech startup company. But I think a lot of it is just logistics, and a lot of it is us just putting pressure on our local governments specifically, who have so much more of an influence on our local areas than many of us think of, and pushing for that consistently and continuously to get that shift across. Because we have the technology, right? It's just a matter of putting that technology to work and having the resources allocated towards that technology.
I wish we had like 30 to 45 more minutes for this panel. I mean, you guys have shared so much what I find great and exciting, information around the area of sustainability. And I feel as if the audience has so many more questions. What I would ask all of our panelists to do is, if you have any resources that you would like to share with the audience, please let me know. We are putting together a list of resources from different people that are working with us on convening this conference for the benefit of our audience. And as we do look to close this panel, I want to invite Stephen to share an upcoming opportunity for all who are on this call.
Oh, yes. So for those who are interested, especially in initial opportunities in organizations, I am accepting applications through my Fellowship for Diversity and Sustainability to diversify the sustainability sector. Unfortunately, we're only working in the US currently, at least for the next year or two. But we will be looking at a more global approach after 2023. So if you want to get in contact with me, for those who are also interested possibly in the RAID program, who are more interested in working with either government sector or with nonprofits, just get my information and let me know, and I can also connect you to the RAID program as well. Plus, there's a plethora of opportunities that keep running across my desk that I'm always willing to share. So however you need me to get that information out, I'm willing to do so.
Excellent. And that's a great segue to another point. Definitely try and find all the speakers that you're coming into contact on LinkedIn. I mean, this is a very valuable community of people that are putting time out, taking time out every day to meet with us. And I want to thank you all for the thoughts that you shared. If you have any final thoughts, please feel free to share. But thanks again for your time and everything today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keenan. Yeah, I appreciate everybody.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
That was excellent. An excellent session. And with that, I will hand it over to Dan.
Yeah, so now thank you for that. We are now moving outside, which is not as easy to do in a virtual environment, but we're going to go ahead and do that. We are welcoming National Park Rangers Kate Sedlacek and Ranger Lincoln Eddy, and they will talk about the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which is in the western part of North Dakota. I have visited. I think it's one of the most fascinating landscapes I've ever seen. So I welcome the Rangers to present about their park.
All right, thank you so much, Dan. Like Dan said, I am National Park Ranger Kate.
And I'm Ranger Lincoln.
And we just like to say we're just a little intimidated following that discussion. So ours is going to just be like a quick overview of this national park and where we are in regards to, say, other national parks in the United States. All right, so Theodore Roosevelt National Park, where are we? We are, like 1 second, technology, right? Here we go. Once again, National Park, where are we? We are in the state of North Dakota. We're in the southwest corner. We are a little unique in terms of our geography because in terms of what land we could get for federal designation, it turned into 3 separate sections of land designation. So we have a south unit that is the larger unit of about 42,000 acres. And then we have a north section that is the north unit, and that is about 24,000 acres. And then in the center of that, about halfway between, although it takes longer to get to because of gravel roads, is the Elkhorn Ranch unit, which we'll address later because it is relating to Theodore Roosevelt himself and his time out here in this area. To give you a quick taste though of this national park, I'll hand it over to Ranger Lincoln to talk to you about the landscape geography as well as the wildlife that we have here.
All right. So we are a Badlands landscape here in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Some of you folks may be familiar with Badlands National Park. We're very similar. We're about twice as old as far as the amount of erosion that's happened. They're a lot pointier and a lot less green than we are. We have been more eroded, a little more plant life here in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. The Badlands themselves, there's a Lakota word, Makoshika or Makoshika, which means no good land or land of bad spirits. And French fur traders also took a look at this area and said, that's a bad land to travel through. So that is where the name Badlands comes from and why they're still referred to that way today. And here in the park, we do have the Little Missouri River. That is our main eroding force. It's also the main water source for most of our wildlife. So if you were to visit Theodore Roosevelt National Park, we are kind of special. We're one of the national parks that do have bison. Bison are our national mammal. In the South unit, we have between, I think, about 350 to 450 as far as the numbers. And in the North unit, there's between 200 and 300. So, occasionally I have to remind myself that even though I see them every day, bison are very cool. If I get stuck in a bison jam, it's like, no, this is actually cool. I'm in a hurry, but bison are neat. Let's let them enjoy the park as much as we do. We also have elk here in the park. If you've been to Rocky Mountain National Park, elk are everywhere down there. Our elk are a lot more rare to see. Best time to see them is in the morning and the evening. And really, the best time of year to come see them is early in the season. So early January when it's like 40 below, elk are out and about everywhere. This photo is taken during the elk rut. So we're headed into the rutting season for our elk here. That's the breeding season. It's when you hear the bulls bugling out in the park. There's nothing quite like a elk bugle. It's a very unearthly sound, and it's very cool to be down in the campground, camping overnight, and then hearing an elk bugle echo across the Badlands. So going back to the Little Missouri River, it's a little unusual. It starts down near Devil's Tower and it flows north. Now, the park is not glacial at all. The glaciers did not carve this out, but they did have an effect on our park. So up near the North unit, the Little Missouri River used to flow all the way north and empty into Hudson Bay. In the North unit, though, it now takes a sharp turn to the east. And that is because during the last ice age, the glaciers descended and basically stopped right at the edge of the park. The river was forced to change direction. In fact, at some of the pullouts up in the North unit, if you stop, there are glacial erratics that were deposited there. As the glaciers melted back, they deposited some rocks that don't really belong in our landscape. The Badlands here are mostly sedimentary rocks, so sandstone, mudstone, bentonite clay, but these rocks have come from somewhere else. And the river takes a sharp turn. The North unit is cut much deeper because when it took that turn, it got on a downhill slope and cut into some softer sediments. So if you're looking for more dramatic views when you visit the park, the North unit is definitely the place to go. In fact, one of the most photographed places in North Dakota is located up there. It's a little riverbend overlook that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 30s. Another thing that makes our park unique is that we do have animals you normally wouldn't expect to find in a national park. So we have a couple of non-native species living in our park. In the South unit, we have a herd of about 180 feral horses. And up in the north unit, there's a small group, about, I think it's 9 longhorn steers. And these are kept as kind of a historic demonstration of animals that might have been on the landscape while Theodore Roosevelt was out here. The horses are descended from ranch stock that was in the area when the park was fenced. So initially, the park was fenced. There were horses that had been roaming free. Any that had brands from local ranchers, the park removed. And they initially thought they were going to try to remove all of them, but it was decided to keep some as that demonstration. And then the longhorn steers in the north unit are located near what's called the Long X Trail, which was a common trail for herding cattle along. And so we keep them in the park as kind of a demonstration of things you might have seen on the landscape back in the 19th century. There are other landscapes in the park. One thing, growing up in Michigan, I used to be around trees, and now I am not. We have a couple of different types of trees. We have cottonwoods, as you can see in this picture. They grow down in the riparian area along the river. Folks call in the fall and like, oh, I want to come see the leaves change. And it's like, no, I hope you like yellow, because that's about all you're going to see here. We also have juniper trees in the park. They're really common. They're all along, you can kind of see them in the background of that photograph along the buttes. Those are places where our elk like to hang out. They offer a lot of shade for the wildlife. The nice thing about this park is you are allowed to hike off trail. So if you want to get off a trail and wander through the park, you can do that. The park is also what's called a mixed grass prairie. So we have a combination of both short and longer grasses here in the park. Prairie, we have about 18 different types of grass in the park. And even though this picture looks very plain, prairies are one of the more diverse ecosystems you'll find in the United States. Lots of different animals live there. You're going to find pocket gophers, lizards, snakes, and various birds. This is, a bull snake is probably the most common snake found in the park. And then you'll see magpies all over the place. We also have flickers, we have meadowlarks, golden eagles, bald eagles, sharp-tailed grouse, all sorts of different birds in the park. It's really a birding paradise for people who want to see these prairie birds. We also have, people ask me, hey, do you have any large predators in the park? Are there bears here? No, mostly, occasionally we get a mountain lion passing through the area, but for the most part, these two are our biggest predators. We have coyotes and we have badgers. And as you can see in this photo, occasionally they do like to hang out together. It's a very special and unique experience to be walking through the prairie and see these two hunting together. People do ask it, hey, I saw a wolf today. And it's like, well, you saw a very well-fed coyote. Our coyotes, if you're used to city coyotes, seeing a coyote looks like this is very much a different experience. And then believe it or not, the most important animal in the park are prairie dogs. So prairie dogs are a keystone species here at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. We have black-tailed prairie dogs. They are, a lot of things eat them. So not just the coyotes and the badgers, but the golden eagles, great horned owls, many different animals eat the prairie dogs. They're also important to our grazers, like our bison and our elk, because the prairie dogs are getting most of their moisture from the plants in the prairie dog towns. They're constantly keeping it short. So it's very nutritious, fresh growth, the plants that grow there. And it helps them avoid predators. They're able to see seeing the predators by keeping things short. And then finally, a lot of different animals share prairie dog burrows as well. So we have burrowing owls in the park. It's a small species of owl that lives down in unused prairie dog burrows. The snakes will live there. We have a species of tiger salamander that will use unused burrows. All sorts of animals live in prairie dog towns. And I'm going to pass things off to Kate. She's going to give you a little bit about the history of why the park is named after Theodore Roosevelt.
Thank you, Lincoln. All right, hello again. So looking into our namesake, much more than just the name of Theodore Roosevelt, I like to say. Although I'll be honest, back in 2014, when I first was looking up where my next job was going to be, I had no idea that there were Badlands in North Dakota or about Theodore Roosevelt prior to his presidency. He was our 26th president of the United States in 1901 originally. But before that, he looks a little younger here. So he's a little younger. This is in his youth. What happened is he first was attracted to North Dakota to hunt bison. So that's what first drew him. He had spent some time where he wanted to get that bison. Took 2 weeks to find them because they were getting overhunted at the time. He ended up, though, falling in love with the ranching idea. So he invested in one ranch at first. He went home, though, and unfortunately, his mom and wife died on the same day. Super devastating for anyone. And he wanted to get away from his life, from his political world, everything, and come to a place of refuge. And that happened to be out here in North Dakota, in the little town of Medora. We are actually less population now. We're about 100 populace now. It was about 200 back then when Roosevelt first visited. So Theodore Roosevelt came back out here. He really worked hard on the ranches. He started a second ranch, that Elkhorn Ranch unit that I talked about is between the two main units. That is his second ranch location. There's no structure left. During his time out here, Roosevelt saw a lot of overhunting occurring. Like I said, when he first came out to hunt bison, he took him 2 weeks to find it because rather than the millions of bison that were roaming the plains, it was down to just a few thousand left. A lot of this, for example, this photo right here is historical use for glue factories. They would use skulls, break them down for glue. They would use the leather of bison hide versus cowhide for industrial uses. But a lot of it was wanton waste, unfortunately. What would happen is the railroad coming through, they did not like those bison jams either. But rather than us waiting patiently, they used to just shoot them and leave them to rot on the side of the railroad. So not great to witness, especially for someone like Roosevelt. He was a huge hunter. He loved to hunt. And then also, he traveled around. It wasn't just bison. It was also bighorn sheep, pronghorn, all the different wildlife out here, including cattle themselves. So a big ranching area. This was all public lands. There was no rights to property. So it was all public grazing during the time Roosevelt was out here in the late 1800s. With that, overgrazing was occurring. People heard, ooh, free land, let's all come. So they all come, putting more and more livestock on the land. Overgrazing occurs. So this is, by the way, his first ranch home. He came for refuge. We still have it today. It's actually out back of our building here. You could tour it. Kind of fancy for the time. Most of the houses were a dirt floor, a sod roof. This has, a shingled roof and a wood floor. So pretty fancy for our East Coast guy. And during his time out here with the overgrazing, there was a harsh winter of 1885 and 1886 that killed off most of the livestock in the area. And that's where, and then leading into the Dust Bowl, we get a lot of the area not being able to survive. And so that land gets donated over to the federal side. That's how we get our designation, is Dust Bowl era. This is the, one photo we have of the second ranch home Roosevelt lived at. So the Elkhorn Ranch unit. This is where, if you have ever read Hunting Trips of a Ranchman, and a couple other of his books, some famous quotes of his come from his time sitting on the porch, where they said he would talk and rock so vigorously he'd rock across the porch during a conversation. So very passionate man. And here he spent the longest time, though, was 3 months solid at this ranch home. Otherwise, he's traveling, around to try and get his bighorn, try and get his pronghorn, and then, visiting family back home on the train. He would go visit. He re-met his childhood sweetheart and married her. And anywho, during that time out here, he realize that we need to protect these areas. If we do not set aside land to protect it, humans are just going to come in and take until we don't have anything left. However, he is also a hunter. He's also taking, right? So he's kind of an interesting fellow where he wants to protect, but it's not preservation that he starts. Roosevelt starts the US Forest Service, so actually not me, but he starts the US Forest Service, which is the idea of setting aside land for permitted use of, so conservation, where you can get a permit to collect firewood, to go hunting, to, even around here, we are surrounded by the oil field, even to drill, but it's permitted use of. It's not just anyone going, if they have the rights, they can do what they want. It's not like that. Now, he also did have the idea of preservation. Preservation is what the National Park Service is. We were designated about 1916, probably 10 years after Forest Service.
Yesterday was our 105th.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Lincoln. Yesterday was 105th birthday. So, yes. So. So preservation, which is a very hands-off, like you cannot touch anything, you can't pick a flower, you can't obviously hunt anything, and you can't drill for like oil, for example. So Roosevelt had a hand in that. In the 230 million acres that Roosevelt set aside, a big portion of that was through US Forest Service or through Fish and Wildlife Refuges, but a small section was through the Antiquities Act of 1906. So while he was president, he was like, Congress is taking a little too long to designate national parks. So I'm going to write the Antiquities Act, and that lets the president, any president in office of the United States, set aside land as a, cultural relevance, a historical relevance, resource relevance, to then sit for a while and say if Congress then wants to make it a national park, they can do so, such as the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. That was one of Roosevelt's. So thanks to this man, we have a lot of land set aside. The idea of protecting our public lands for the use of future generations is still long lasting. And we like to say, started here with that idea of witnessing it himself, what would happen if we did not have those laws in place. And without further ado, thank you so much for joining us. I think we did that in our time. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ranger Kate and Ranger Lincoln. I have to say, I'm a big fan of the park. I have cut and stuck in a bison jam, and after an hour, I was like, I think I'm going the other way. It's their park. But that's been great. And anybody who has the opportunity to travel into the central part of the United States, it is a ways to get out there, but it is absolutely worth it. It is a beautiful part of the country and a wonderful park. And thank you so much for being stewards of that park. So I think we're going to take a break now, and you have a video to run. Okay. And we'll be back in a few minutes for our last session for the day.
Living systems have been around for a few billion years and will be around for many more. In the living world, there's no landfill. Instead, materials flow. One species' waste is another's food, energy is provided by the sun, things grow, then die, and nutrients return to the soil safely. And it works. Yet as humans, we've adopted a linear approach. We take, we make, and we dispose. A new phone comes out, so we ditch the old one. Our washing machine packs up, so we buy another. Each time we do this, we're eating into a finite supply of resources and often producing toxic waste. It simply can't work long term. So what can? If we accept that the living world's cyclical model works, can we change our way of thinking so that we too operate a circular economy? Let's start with the biological cycle. How can our waste build capital rather than reduce it? By rethinking and redesigning products and components, and the packaging they come in, we can create safe and compostable materials that help grow more stuff. As they say in the movies, no resources have been lost in the making of this material. So what about the washing machines, mobile phones, fridges? We know they don't biodegrade. Here, we're talking about another sort of rethink, a way to cycle valuable metals, polymers, and alloys so they maintain their quality and continue to be useful beyond the shelf life of individual products. What if the goods of today became the resources of tomorrow? It makes commercial sense. Instead of the throw away and replace culture we've become used to, we'd adopt a return and renew one, where products and components are designed to be disassembled and regenerated. One solution may be to rethink the way we view ownership. What if we never actually owned our technologies? We simply licensed them from the manufacturers. Now, let's put these two cycles together. Imagine if we could design products to come back to their makers, their technical materials being reused and their biological parts increasing agricultural value. And imagine that these products are made and transported using renewable energy. Here we have a model that builds prosperity long-term. And the good news is, there are already companies out there who are beginning to adopt this way of working. But the circular economy isn't about one manufacturer changing one product. It's about all the interconnecting companies that form our infrastructure and economy coming together. It's about energy. It's about rethinking the operating system itself. We have a fantastic opportunity to open new perspectives and new horizons. Instead of remaining trapped in the frustrations of the present, with creativity and innovation, we really can rethink and redesign our future.
Okay, and we are back and ready for our next session. This next guest needs no introduction. I want to thank Thomas for taking time out of his day, not only to join this JUMP conference, but also to lead a session. We all know Thomas is our supreme leader here at ISA, ASBL. Thanks again, Thomas. And here, without any further ado, here is Thomas with the LinkedIn tutorial.
Thank you, Keenan. Thanks everyone for still staying around, for joining this session. Can you hear me and can you see me? Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm joining. For me, it's tonight already from Milan in Italy. I'm on my way back from a very nice vacation I had in the south of France, dedicated to some relax and some art. And I had a beautiful day today at Fondazione Prada in Milan. So anyone, whoever of you goes to Milan and is interested in art, I really can recommend you going there. But now I would like to give you a little bit of insights how LinkedIn can help you or can be of use, not only for your, let's say, daily work with ISD, but even much more for your personal career, for shaping your online profile that might help you in the future when applying for a job, but also when having first interactions with other business partners. So let me share my screen. Let me try this to come to the right one. I think that's this one, yeah. So first, I would like to give you a very brief overview about LinkedIn and about myself. So LinkedIn was founded back in 2002. So it's you could say almost 20 years old. It's not still a teenager, but continuously growing. It went live in do you still see my screen? Yeah. It went live in May 2003. So after the foundation, it took them some time to set up the entire platform, do all the technical homework. Myself, I'm having an account on LinkedIn since August 2006. So you could maybe call myself an early adapter. In Europe, LinkedIn was not popular for a very long time. We had our own professional business networks, mainly in the German-speaking part of Europe. We were using Xing. Some people still use Xing, but basically, I would say nowadays the dominance of LinkedIn for a professional business network is like the same like it was with Facebook some years ago for a personal network. Although I think with Facebook, especially the younger people are getting, the more they investigate in other technologies like Instagram. We most of us are using, but I think some of you might use TikTok, and I'm sure when we see each other in half a year or a year, there will be some new platform already available dedicated to personal private networking. While LinkedIn is clearly dedicated for your, let's say, professional appearance online. I've got a premium account in February 2020. What's a premium account about? I will explain a little bit later. And until 2020, I was mainly a passive user of LinkedIn. That means like I was consuming information and I was building up my network. And from May 2021, so from May this year, I became a more active poster, but not only a poster, I also, let's say, started liking content, started sharing content, not only on my personal LinkedIn, but also on the LinkedIn page of ISD ASBL, of ISD Global, and in various other LinkedIn groups I'm involved. I have a network of approximately 1,000 people. I think at the moment it's 1,200 something, and it's continuously growing. Although I have to say here very clearly, a large network does not automatically mean you do your LinkedIn stuff much better than anyone else is doing. I have some friends who have a network of almost 5,000 people on LinkedIn, but they don't post anything. You don't see any interactions, and they don't really have a target group of what they are focusing. They are just accepting anyone who is trying to connect with them, and simply connect with anyone who is getting proposed by LinkedIn. While if you maintain your network and you, let's say, try to identify people that are out of your field of interest, and that does not automatically have to be the same field of interest for a very long period. So taking myself, for example, like I'm involved in ISD for almost the same time than LinkedIn started. So I started my journey with ISD in September 2002. On the local committee level, then I was involved in the National Committee of Austria, and I think from 2004, 2005 onwards, I got involved a bit more on the international level. But beside this, of course, I also had let's say, a professional career. I started chemical engineering, also mechanical engineering, and I was for quite a long time a co-CEO of a mechanical engineering company. And you could imagine that my LinkedIn appearance was very much dedicated also to my regular job. And when I moved, or when I made the decision in February this year to, let's say, leave my previous company, I was even working longer for them than for ISD, and start my own business. It made my life in terms of LinkedIn much easier, because suddenly I did not have to show two faces on LinkedIn. I have one LinkedIn face at the moment, that's the ISD face, because for my personal business, which is related to consulting, I rely very much on my existing network of contact, so I don't need to do a lot of marketing. But again, that is something anyone, I think, needs to identify for yourself, and these are some questions over the time you will getting asked, and you would have to answer. To give you an idea about the power of LinkedIn. LinkedIn is having approximately 760 million users worldwide. And I think that number is already outdated. I think I prepared the presentation about 2 months ago. And I think at the moment they are almost by 800 million users. So they are really fast growing. In North America, you have almost 200 million users. In Europe, it's roughly the same number, 200 million users. In the Asian Pacific area, a bit more than 200 million. In Latin America, 114 million. So you can see, although there is a very large population in Latin America, it's still not that popular. My feeling is it's the language barrier, because when you look to LinkedIn, most of the content that is posted is in English. Very few content is posted in your local languages, and I think the trend is very much going or continuing into this direction, that the posts you would like to share, you would share your opinion to a wider audience. They are typically in English. And the smallest region at the moment is Middle East and Africa, with only 39 million users. And I think the majority of these 39 million users is based in the Middle East and not in Africa. What I think is unfortunately a sign that, let's say, the business importance of Africa is still not that much there. So it will definitely take quite some time until people in Africa are going to build up their LinkedIn appearance and starting with profiles there. But much more important to the, let's say, standard users you will find on LinkedIn is you have 57 million companies represented on LinkedIn. And why this part about the companies is having a certain importance, I will show you a little bit later when looking into some LinkedIn profiles. And most of the companies, they have their decision makers represented on LinkedIn. May it be that they even manage their accounts on their own, or that they have some assistant taking care of the account management. I follow some people on LinkedIn. I could imagine those of you who already have a LinkedIn profile might follow the same people, like, I don't know, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and so on. And from time to time, you get the feeling some of them are posting really on their own content, while some of them, they have a post frequency or let's say quality of the post that definitely there is a kind of public relations department involved, and it's not only an individual who takes care of the content. You find this also quite often when you look to profiles from politicians. Very few politicians are, let's say, that authentic that they really post content on their own. And I mean, that can be a good thing or a bad thing. I think in the US, you know what I'm talking about. Not about LinkedIn, but you had someone who was very active on Twitter posting his own content without reviews. So I think in that league, it can be of an advantage to have someone having a second opinion about the post. One thing not to forget is in 2016, LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft. So I think to have a basic understanding on what platform, if you're entering LinkedIn, you are dealing with, you should know, like, it's at the end it's a Microsoft product nowadays you are using. On LinkedIn, there is a very, let's say, common rule how you can be successful on LinkedIn. And of course, it's always I would say a very engineering-like thing to measure success in terms of numbers. I guess also people who study economics, they are also very, very focused on numbers. And I mean, that principle is not coming from myself. I had some LinkedIn trainings when I started to become a bit more active, and the trainers we had there, they're sharing these concepts, and that's the so-called 1/5 rule. So whenever you are having content on LinkedIn created, it should be only 1/5 of the content. You really talk about yourself. You praise your own business, your own achievements. You tell stories, what you have done, what you're planning to do. But mostly you should talk about others. Why this is so important is linked to the algorithm behind LinkedIn. So you can imagine, although you're connected with 1,000 people or 100 people or 5,000 people, it's only interesting, or let's say your post only becomes interesting to the people when it pops up in their feed. If your posts are not popping up in their feed, people would really specifically have to look for your postings. Unless you are getting famous or you have someone who is really interested in your work, might hardly ever happen. But when you talk enough about others, automatically your posts appear in their feed in a higher priority. And we had also within the ASTI community some tries about this, and I have to say, yeah, it works. It's not just a nice story. And I mean, to have a very simple principle, for each 12 likes, shares, or comments you're doing on LinkedIn, you should create one genuine post. And whenever you are creating on your own account a genuine post talking about something that matters for you, try to be online, try to be available on LinkedIn for a certain time afterwards, in order to be able to comment on other comments, to trigger some reactions, and to follow what's going on. The worst thing that you can do is you post something, and then something else could happening, like you are not in front of the computer, some people are commenting, maybe leading a discussion in a total wrong direction, and you realize 4 hours later, oh my God, what have I triggered with my post? And I mean, I think it's, as long as you are not planning to start any revolution or something like this, so have very, very critical posts on LinkedIn, typically nothing major would harm. But I remember we had some posts from ASTI on LinkedIn recently about the country, and we in ASTI we are working like this, that we cross-share content on several platforms. So it's not only LinkedIn, we use LinkedIn, we use Facebook, we use Instagram. Sometimes the content is a little bit more tailored, sometimes the content is on all the platforms the same. But what happened is like we did a posting, and the postings are scheduled, so it's not like that you press a button at the moment when you do the posting. There is a tool involved into this. And then we did not monitor the posting for, I think, half an hour. And then and please excuse me using this word, the shitstorm started. Because some people had the opinion it's not good to post anything about that specific country. And I think that's a brilliant sign, even when you think, well, I think we can talk about anyone in the ASTI network publicly, because all those countries are our members, our cooperating institutions. We aim to send students to those countries. We aim to receive students from those countries within our network. But yeah, it can happen that this is received in a different way from the wider community. So something to keep in mind. Next thing I wanted to look into together with you is how a LinkedIn profile can look like, what content you can focus on, how you specifically can grow your network, what's the importance of personal contacts, why you should use use hashtags and why a press corner, especially if you plan to maybe set up a LinkedIn for your ISD committee, for your future company, or your company maybe is asking you, okay, can you take care a little bit about our LinkedIn appearance? What a press corner can bring some advantages. So I'm now stopping the presentation and switch to my LinkedIn profile. Can you see my LinkedIn profile now? Keenan? Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can see it. Good. So for the LinkedIn profile, I think to have a LinkedIn profile, like with every social media profile, things are starting with your profile picture, with your avatar. So what I always recommend people is choose a profile picture and not leave the space for the profile picture totally empty. I know, like, especially in the beginning, you might not feel like you are having a professional enough profile picture, and definitely many people don't like to use their Facebook pictures or Instagram pictures for the business network. But I think nowadays it's not a big challenge, even with a mobile phone, to get a nice appealing profile picture. Then you also can have here another background picture. What I picked is let's say the branding of ISD, but that's basically totally up to you what at the end you decide. Only keep in mind it's a business network, so I would not rather have here holiday pictures or something like this associated with, unless you are working in the vacation industry or you are working for a travel agency. Then maybe that might be the most suitable picture you can pick for your background. Then what is very important to know, beside your name, you can edit the details, like your position or what message you would like to immediately deliver when people are searching for you. Because what you see here on the right is let's say how people appear when you look for them, and I mean, actually these are all people from ISD you see here listed, and most of the people, they have just here their position in ISD, and that's what you find with many people. They just put their position, what they have in the company. But you find a lot of other people who are putting here already a little message, like visionary thinker or editor, author, and public speaker. Or like I tried to do is to include a hashtag internship and our tagline work experience discover. So it's not much space you have here to edit, but there is some more information you can share. Then under featured, you can add some company web page, some personal web page you might like to show to your audience. And under experience, you can enter your professional experience, your volunteering experience, your education, and many other things. And of course, you can edit all this information quite easy, and you can add additional education, for example. And that's why I think it's very important to know that LinkedIn is having 57 million companies registered. Whenever you pick a university, a school, a company, an organization you would like to show that you were working for or you are associated with, make sure that you are picking the right company, the right organization. Ideally, when the company is having already a LinkedIn account, you see a little logo appearing. Because what can happen if you pick the wrong company, or if you don't search for the company you're really working for, people cannot directly link you to that company. So when they search later on for the company, because they know, like, oh yeah, you're working for let's say General Electric, and they only know this, they know a little bit about your name, and you have a name like John Smith, then I could imagine even with John Smith and General Electric, you might find 100 people. But the more specific, the more detailed, and the more accurate you are here with your information, it might be easier to be found on LinkedIn. And of course, there are always two sides about, do I want to get found on LinkedIn or not? You can have a lot of privacy settings, for example, that your profile picture is only shown to your contacts. You can say, well, my full name is only shown to my contacts. To the public, it would be, for example, only Thomas F. Dot, or you can even reduce this further. What I think is, LinkedIn is a network to make connections, to interact with people. So the more you start limiting yourself with your LinkedIn appearance, the more maybe you should question, is there a sense of using LinkedIn? On the other hand, especially when, for example, you are in a phase of applying for a job, or when you get a position in a company, when you start recruiting people, you might not be that happy that automatically, when you open a LinkedIn profile, everyone knows that you opened the LinkedIn profile. And I mean, there are a few strategies how to avoid this. You see this golden LinkedIn symbol, that means that I'm having a premium account. Premium account is giving several advantages. One of the major advantages, what I would say it brings is, you see who did view your profile. But you don't see automatically all the people who did view your profile. You only see those who wanted that you see it. When you scroll to the very end of this list, you see different things. So for example, you see here someone at Wind Europe. So this person, and then I know exactly who this person is, because I only have one contact at Wind Europe. But this person has a setting that avoids to show more than just the company name. So you never get, when he's clicking on your profile, you never get his name, you never get the profile picture or any other information. But you can even set this a step further, and that's at the very end of this list. You have here 99 LinkedIn members. These people viewed your profile in private mode. So that's an option what you can use if you start investigating other LinkedIn profiles, and you want to avoid that people know that you were having a look into their profile. You set yourself to this private mode and avoid that you get shown. On the other hand, that means like you don't see who was watching your profile. So it's like a taking and giving in that setup. What I wanted to ask you is, who of you is having already a LinkedIn profile? Can you somehow indicate this with a thumbs up in the whether the chat or however you prefer it, to get an idea? Okay, so my feeling is telling me the majority of you is not having a LinkedIn profile yet. Okay, good. So hopefully in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I change your mind and you start building up a profile. What does not automatically mean you have to become super active from the very beginning. But I think it's a very interesting tool if it's used in the right way, that can help on one hand to boost, let's say, your personal career, but also can help ISD to show that we are, let's say, having a very broad appearance. So coming back to my presentation, just a second. So I think I gave you some overview about a profile can look like. And I'm not saying I have the most professional profile. I think in the end, everyone has to decide on her or his own what really is essential for the appearance. What I think is definitely essential is to have a picture, because I think whenever you're trying to interact with someone, you want somehow to know to whom you are talking, to whom you are emailing with, and when already the let's say the business profile is very empty, it gives a little bit of a strange feeling. Thank you, Lucia, for asking this question about how's the best way to look for jobs on LinkedIn. I'll come to that a little bit later. First, I want to talk a little bit about what content you can post or you should post on LinkedIn. I think, and that maybe somehow is a little bit related to the way to look for jobs on LinkedIn. I think when you're interested in a certain area, you just graduated from university or you're planning to graduate in the next months, and you want to communicate, well, I'm open for a new position. Of course, you can use this option to do. There's a button open for work, and then you get this green circle around your profile picture. But a very nice other way is to communicate about this. Talk about what is your thesis about, what is your bachelor or your master thesis about, who was involved in supporting you for the thesis, who were the professors, mention your alma mater in the post, and there it's very important not only to let's say type in the name of the people, but really tag them with the @ symbol, and then search for the company, search for the people. You might find some people who have disabled this option to get tagged, so don't be astonished. That can happen from time to time. And I think in relation to posting content, other topics that can be is, as long as you are still involved in ISD and you find like, well, there's something interesting to share, like you got a new ISD employer in your committee, or you have an intern from another country in your committee, and you link them with the employer. There's a nice success story. All these things are somehow professional, business related, and worth to share. What I rather would not share is like, well, how was my last vacation, or what things have I done over the weekend. Although that does not mean when you had really some overwhelming experience in your personal life that you could not share this at all. You regularly find people when they really experience something interesting to a wider audience, that they feel like, well, that makes sense to share. Specific network growth is something what I mentioned in the beginning. LinkedIn is proposing you from the very beginning, people, LinkedIn, the artificial intelligence behind LinkedIn, things you know and you should be connected with. And that can be in the very beginning just because you studied at the same university, you worked maybe once for the same company, and you're getting these suggestions from LinkedIn. But it can be the next step, that because you have a specific network already, LinkedIn is suggesting other people out of this group that you can connect with. I'm not saying you should not add a large number of people. What I'm saying is, at a certain moment, you will realize out of your network, only a very small number of people is really active. And if you want to make sure that your content is let's say, spread in the right direction, try to stick to people who are active in the network and don't care so much about growing in a very large scale, but only with people who are not active at all. People who never like content, who never share content, are doubtful, in my opinion, that they even see the content. Because when you post on LinkedIn, you also can see some statistics. And in most of the cases, the statistics are generated like this, that people some scroll on the mobile phone, and only when they scroll over your content, they appear as a pick. In fact, they might never have read your content or really had a deeper interaction with. What I feel is very important to have is personal contacts. So whenever I was in the very beginning posting my own content and wanted to make sure that I have a certain reach over my really close network, I was asking some friends on LinkedIn if they could comment, if they could like, if they could share my content. And I tried to trigger here people that are not automatically in exactly the same bubble I'm in. So I'm now saying ISD is a bubble. And it's very nice if people within this ISD bubble are sharing content that ISD is looking for, let's say, development of our internship program for sustainable industries. But as long as this message is only staying within the ISD bubble, it's good for let's say internal communication. But all these industry people who might be interested in partnering with us never hear about this message. While if you identify people who are working, whether for major companies, for consulting companies, but also for production companies like General Electric, like Siemens, like McKinsey, who are somehow in your network and you know them good enough, and you ask them, okay, could you put a like, or could you share some of my content? You immediately will see how this is growing your view numbers and how this can impact the spread of your content. Besides this, another important thing to let's say get your content visible is the hashtag. And I think what most of the people who are, let's say, active on Instagram, they or on Twitter, they know how to use the hashtag. But I think with the hashtag, there is something very, very important to know and to understand. And I have here some, of course, ISD related examples, but to give you an idea what is a good hashtag and what is a not very powerful hashtag. So our tagline, Work Experience Discover, is for us as ISD a very important hashtag, but we only have 4 followers. So whenever you put this hashtag to a post, only 4 people will see this in their feed. If you put ISD as a hashtag, only 21 people will see this in their feed. But sometimes we tend to compare ourselves with ISAC a lot. If you put the hashtag ISAC, only 537 people will see this in their feed. On the other hand, ISD is having on LinkedIn around 17,000 followers, while ISAC is having around 380,000 followers. So in terms of the ratio between the hashtag and the overall followers, I think we are not doing so bad. But in general, these hashtags are not having a deeper impact. It's nice to combine them, but just to rely on hashtags that are not having a large number of followers is not helping. For example, when you pick the hashtags internships or internship, you realize, depending only of the singular or of the plural, whether you're reaching 310,000 people or only 78,000 people. While when you put the hashtag education, you're reaching 9.6 million people. So whenever you feel like, well, I have content that is really essential to a wider audience, and I would like to share, try to identify hashtags that are working and that are really boosting your posts and enabling your posts to a wider audience. And over the time you're practicing this, you will realize there is some engagement and interaction with people who are not from your network, but also who might be interested in, let's say, joining your network or also inviting you to their network. typically a good number for the hashtags per post is 3 to 5. And as I already said earlier, it's really important to mention people and the companies in the posts, because that automatically means it gets shown in their timeline, in their feed, and you can trigger an additional interaction with this. Then, yeah, as I said before, topics for the post is specific background informations. I think that is something what is very interesting also when looking for a job. So if you out of your studies, out of your master thesis, you are having some really essential information to share with a wider audience, and of course it's not that confidential that because you did the master thesis for a company you would not be allowed to share this. That's a perfect way to build up your professional profile and generate interest not only about employers, but maybe also about future business partners who would identify you in a few months or in a few years as an expert in that field. Then, of course, in general public relation topics, anything that's related to breaking news. So if you feel like you study environmental engineering, for example, and there is a breakthrough in let's say battery technology, then a very interesting idea could be that you are commenting or posting some stuff related to this. It's related to your field of experience and related to some breaking news that are anyway in the media at this moment. Same as with industry trends, with other external content. All of that can be interesting topics for your posts. I know, like my time is already getting a little bit short, so I just want to give you a very brief idea how a good post can look like. So whenever you look to a post, and I'll give you here an example with any post. So just to see this, that's from a senior lecturer at Georgia State University. The headline is only these 2 lines you can see here. So when you don't catch anyone with this headline, you don't make them clicking here, see more, and read the entire content. The same is if you have a good picture, if you have a good video that is appealing, then people are rather tend to open your post, to stay at your post, and to really consume the content you are providing. The text, in the past, you only could have 1,300 characters. Since June, there are 3,000 characters possible. Although I'm always warning people a little bit, don't try to write entire essays on LinkedIn. There are possibilities to have other content on LinkedIn that is not just a post, where you really can have more information shared. What is a very interesting way is a call to action. So you can ask a question in your post, ask people to comment, share their opinion. Sometimes this is working very well, sometimes this is not working at all. I think it's always depending on, first of all, the audience, but definitely also the content of the post. I think I was already mentioning the hashtags. Then I think what is important is the reference of the picture. So whenever you're posting a picture, you're posting a video that you don't own, provide copyright information. You might have the feeling in the beginning, well, that's not important, that's not essential. Well, I tell you, one of my hobbies, one of my passion is I'm a photographer, and I do a lot of art photography recently, and I share these pictures with the artists, and they later on share that content on their Instagram profiles, LinkedIn profiles, and so on. And I don't charge any money for this. Most of them are my friends. But what I really feel is important that they tag me and mention me as a reference for the picture, because that automatically is building up my reputation in this kind of environment. And you might feel people are not very happy when you use their pictures without mentioning them. And legally speaking, that even can cause some additional troubles. I think what some of you might have stopped so far for using LinkedIn is what the majority of the people, and also myself, had a long time of let's say, stopping me from being an active user. I think the major part is what is called the fear of the public opinion. Whenever you post something, whenever you like something, you feel like, or you might feel like, well, that's associated with what other people start thinking about myself. And yes, of course, that's true on one hand. On the other hand, don't think that because you have 1,000 people in your network, all these 1,000 people ever notice what you are liking, what you are posting. It's a very small fraction of the people who in fact really see what you are doing. And out of this small fraction, it's even a smaller fraction who in the end might really later on contact you about, oh, you liked some content. Are you really standing for that, or you just press the like button? But beside this, I think it's having no clear goal for LinkedIn. Although I think the majority of you're starting your professional career, and I think a very clear goal for LinkedIn is looking for jobs, finding jobs, and a very easy way to look for jobs is when you open the company pages on LinkedIn, and there is those companies who are doing this, there's a section about job posts. And when you go to this, you very easy find what job posts are available. And you will realize when you do this for a few companies, the algorithm of LinkedIn is very good and is automatically proposing you job opportunities in your field of studies, in your area of interest. And you will see, well, there's a continuous stream and flow of job opportunities being shared with you. And I mean, I can share a secret with you that somehow, anyway, no secret anymore. But we were hiring a marketing and communications manager, and we used LinkedIn also for launching our job posts. And typically, we would have expected maybe to get 5 to 10 applications for the post. Overall, we got 126, if I'm not mistaken, and the majority of them were coming via the LinkedIn channel. So you have to be aware of when you apply for a job offer that is published on LinkedIn, you are definitely not the only one. If you have a premium account, and the premium account you don't need to have for an entire year, you can only have on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis for that period when you're interested in looking for a job. That gives you an additional opportunity to analyze a little bit who is already applying for the job. You get some more additional insight. So that could be something where you feel like, oh, well, maybe I invest $30, $50 into this to have an advantage compared to other people and get some more information. Yeah, three other areas is low knowledge of function. I do hope that I increased your knowledge of the function of LinkedIn in these 45 minutes. To show yourself, I mean, as I said, it's the profile picture, but not so many other things are necessary. And I think what definitely for myself, I learned over the past months with the use of LinkedIn, don't try to be an ultimate perfectionist. Most of the content you are doing is only visible. Of course, when people search for it, it's visible for a long period. But most of the people only see it for a day or for 2 days. So there is no need to invest half a day in creating a post that is visible for a day. Just try to create regular content. And of course, the quality will improve over the time. What I can recommend you when you want to have good posts is do them on the computer and not do them on the phone. the phone is okay for liking content. The phone is okay for commenting on something. But what is already giving a very good increase of the quality is if you're doing your posts from the computer, because that simply is a better setup, a more professional setup than just trying to create the entire content on the phone. So thank you for listening to me. I'm not sure if we have time for questions and answers, but definitely add me on LinkedIn, get in touch with me over LinkedIn, and I'm here to answer all your questions directly on LinkedIn.
Yes, and I would definitely encourage you all to, again, heed his advice. This is a great opportunity, this conference, to expand your network. And what a better way to do that than taking Thomas's advice and, taking this and learning, transferring the knowledge that you got from this presentation into actual action and building your network. So definitely feel free to reach out to Thomas for more tips on how you can improve your LinkedIn profile. I wish we had time for questions, but we're definitely running low on time. I will hand it off to Nancy, who will close us off for our today.
Great, thanks, Keenan. First, we wanted to thank everyone for participating today and all of our speakers, especially for joining us. I also want to personally thank the ISA USA team for a great first day and everything that they've done to make this a success. Tomorrow, we also have another full day, so be ready for a yoga session with our colleagues from ISA India. We'll be having our career fair. It's going to feature employers USDA, Reddit, Deepcast, and Bank United, so come with your questions. And then finally, we're going to close out the day with a virtual celebration. So come prepared, dressed in clothing representing your country so that we can celebrate different cultures. And as a reminder, our sessions are recorded and on Facebook. So if you didn't catch anything today or want to go back to it, you can do so through social media. With that, I will say good evening, good night, good morning to everybody around the world, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.